Okay, so on this Saturday, the 15th of June, we're already a week into the Women's World Cup. A lot of debating points about the tournament. If this was a Men's World Cup, the media would be going nuts over the amount of VAR calls. The amount of goals that the hiding Thailand got. It's quite an interesting tournament. The quality's a lot better than people expected, and I'm quite enjoying it. I've missed the odd bit of action here or there, but for the most part, I've watched most of the games and I've been entertained by what I've seen. I'm not saying it's exactly the same game as the men's because it's not. It's a different style, it's a different quality, and there's different skill sets. So let's stop the comparison there. They just play the same sport. That is it. But the VAR decisions really important because they're going to affect how football is refereed over the next 5 years. We've obviously got Euro 2020 next year. These VAR rule experiments they're using this year are going to affect how the games are called next year in Euro 2020. So it's going to be really interesting to see, what other controversies VAR will throw up. We've already seen a goalkeeper booked for coming off her line at a penalty. We've seen VAR, for the most part, get things right. We've seen a new definition of an interpretation of handball. Referees and officials are less willing to give the offside flag earlier, so they're waiting and then putting the flag up after several phases of play. That is a directive from FIFA. And all these little things are going to, feed into the men's game. And we are going to see VAR become a big talking point going forward in the Euros next year, in the World Cup in Qatar, and the Confederations Cup in Qatar as well. There's going to be some really big talking points in the international game and in the club game. So the Champions League and Europa League this coming season, big talking points. They are going to be big talking points because this could decide the outcome of games. Now, I'll get my notes out, and I have lots of notes because notes are fun. Notes are very fun. Oh, they're so fun. Many notes. So many games have had VAR in them. Especially the Italy-Australia game. There was England-Scotland had VAR. That you've had a few other. VAR Australia-Brazil that had real big impact on that game. And yesterday, Jamaica VAR against Italy, and VAR with England and Argentina. So many of the big key games have been not decided necessarily, but the outcomes have been altered because of VAR decisions, and they have taken up a lot of time. So if you look at the time taken for a VAR decision to be reviewed, it's too long. And in some games, there are multiple VAR decisions which take out up to 2-3 minutes time on a VAR review. And that disrupts the flow of the game. It disrupts the pace. It disrupts the rhythm. And while I understand why VAR is there, and it is for the 90% of the time correct in what decisions it gives, it doesn't help the flow of the game necessarily. It doesn't help keep the pace of the game going. There's a lot of breaks in there. Do you think the streak will last longer than 11? I'm off the score for 11. Oh, the stream. Probably not. I'm probably going to be done. I might. It depends. It depends on how many people decide to tune in. It depends on the amount of questions. I mean, I've obviously just been talking about the Women's World Cup and VAR and how that's going to be important going forward into the men's game. Depends how many questions people have, and it depends on how many people decide to tune in and want to participate. I mean, this stream could be over very, very quickly. Good. We haven't even got to the Stanley Cup discussion about which teams are still waiting to win and how the St. Louis Blues did it and why it's such a great comeback from where they were in January. We haven't even got to that point yet. We haven't discussed the NBA yet and the Toronto Raptors winning and what that actually means for basketball in Canada and the NBA's direction north of the border in the US, and the fact that because the ice hockey, the NHL teams from Canada all fell out in the first round, what does that actually mean going forward as an organisation and as a league, considering they only have the one professional team in Canada? We haven't even discussed the Leeds Chiefs and the fact they haven't named a single signing yet for their new team. Considering this is their inaugural season, they haven't named a single player yet. They've only named the coach Sam Zajac, so there's not a single player for the Leeds Chiefs been publicly named yet as a signing. That's interesting to note. Oh yeah, look, I mean, it just shows how equally balanced the NHL is. I mean, Arizona missed out by a couple of points. Literally, Arizona missed out by 2 wins. If they'd won 2 extra games, they would have got in, and St. Louis might not have made it into the seeded positions, and might have even had an even tougher start to the playoffs. It shows the parity that a salary cap can bring to a league. Anyone can beat anyone on a given night, unless you're the Ottawa Senators, of course, because you're on fire. But it does show what, a salary cap can bring in parity, because the Maple Leafs and the Rangers and the Blackhawks, if there was no salary cap, they could sign who they wanted. And the Blues, beginning of January, were the last team in the NHL. They were dead last. So in the space of January the 2nd to June, I think it's June the 12th, they've gone from dead last in the league to winning the Stanley Cup. That in itself, I don't think has been done before. They had a coaching change mid-season. That has been done before, I think 6 or 7 times for a coaching change, and then go on to win the Stanley Cup. But that doesn't happen often either. So what the Blues have done is something that, not been done for a very, very long time. This is their 4th Stanley Cup final appearance, and they win it. But it's taken nearly 50 years for that to happen. What does it mean for the rest of the NHL? Well, that's 2 first-time winners in 2 years. It is showing the parity that the league has. I think we have to do a video looking at the teams that haven't won it yet and how long they've been working towards that goal. The Vegas Golden Knights, I mean, what is their 2nd season? I mean, this is their 3rd season going into it, and their 1st season they get to the Stanley Cup final. But the Washington Capitals were trying for 40 odd years. Got to the final once before in '98, and then 20 years later they win the win. It is surprising with the Leeds Chiefs, because a lot of other teams are well ahead in the signing stakes. They've picked up a lot of players. They've signed a lot of players. It'll be interesting to see who decides to take that leap of faith and to sign with a brand new team, and what kind of team they build, because now it is technically postseason of all the hockey leagues in the world. It is going to be interesting to see who Leeds sign, what kind of team they put together, what kind of experience this team has, how competitive they're going to be. Because they've got to build a team dynamic and a team direction they have never played together before. This is the first hockey team I think Leeds has ever had. So there's a lot of questions there about the team and about the direction they're going to take. But there's an EIHL goalie who's joined Bracknell. So Dean Skins has left Bracknell, and we've got the old Milton Keynes Lightning, one of their goalies. So there are a couple of EIHL goalies who've decided to drop down a level and get more regular game time. That's not a big thing, but I do think if it's like a 2nd or 3rd choice goaltender, what kind of level are they going to be at, because they are a backup? That's another thing. Also, who's going to be their inputs? It's going to be hard for them to put a team together that's going to be competitive, absolutely, because the teams in the north of England, are they really going to want to give up key players that they want to sign? They're going to have to try and get the locals on board, because this is Leeds' first experience of a hockey team, and it will take time. And all I want to see is the Leeds Chiefs be as competitive as possible, because it's no fun getting walloped like 8, 9, 10-0 a night. We saw that with the Hull Pirates in their first couple of seasons. They took some hidings. We saw it with the Cardiff Fire when they took that step up to the NIHL one a couple of years ago, and they were getting hammered pillar to post. They couldn't even win a game. And that's no good for player development. That's no good for the future progress and growth of a team and a fan base. If your team are getting battered day in and day out, whoever goes in there is going to have to expect a tough season. It's not going to be easy, but I'd rather see a very competitive Leeds Chiefs side that can win games and be competitive rather than the team that's just getting a hiding every single night, because it does the player development no good, and it does the development of a fan base no good if the team really are getting hammered every week. Because we saw what happened with the Cardiff Fire. They couldn't even name a roster for the following season because players just had enough of getting beaten every day, like by an average of 7-8 goals a game. It makes it difficult, but it's going to be interesting, to see what they turn up with as a team and how they play and going forward, because as far as I know, they don't even have a logo yet, or a jersey. So they've got a busy summer ahead over the next 3 months to get pieces in place to be ready for the new season. I mean, I think it's going to be fun watching a new team play. Absolutely, it's going to be fun seeing a new team and a new fan base. But it's like any new team that's been set up. You have to build foundations and baby steps. It's going to be fun. I think it's going to be interesting though. I don't think it's going to be a roller coaster of a ride. But I think in the end, I think a couple of years down the line, it's going to have a payoff where the sport as a whole is in a healthier place in that part of the world, and there is a competitive team in Leeds. It's a sports-mad city anyway. It's a university city, so it has people from all over the world living in Leeds. I can see it working, but it has to be done in the right way, and the foundations have to be built. But at the end of the day, it's one of them, because if Leeds can obviously get that kind of a couple of wins in their first few games or in their first couple of months, then that will serve them well, because they know they can win as a team and they can go forward. And Leeds is a sportsman city, so I don't see it being a problem that they're going to attract fans and they're going to have success going forward. Absolutely, I can see them being fine, but it's more making the team as competitive as possible and building a squad and a roster that can compete against established teams that have been doing this for years. And that's the tricky bit. On the NBA side of things, the Toronto Raptors obviously have won their first title, and it's the first Canadian team to win an NBA title. And that's going to be interesting because they're the only team in Canada at the moment. There was a team in Vancouver, no longer there. The NBA, I mean, if basketball in Canada is to become a major sport and to grow, they need to look outside of Toronto. And that's the interesting thing, because one of the reasons why a lot of people tuned in to watch the Raptors win their NBA championship was the Canadian sides in the NHL crashed out of the NHL playoffs quite early on in the piece, if you think about it. The Flames, the Maple Leafs, and the Jets all crashed out in the first round, and a lot of Canadians had no sport to watch, and they decided to tune into the Raptors. How many of those fans stick around? That's up to the NBA's marketing, the Raptors marketing, and a TV deal that they put in place. It's going to be interesting to see how the NBA markets the Raptors going forward. Very interesting to see how the NBA markets the Raptors going forward, because the fact that they've done what they've done has grown the sport in Canada. And the ironic thing is, basketball was invented by a Canadian, so it is what it is. At the end of the day, The NBA's tried in Vancouver. It didn't work in Vancouver, and you have to look at the reasons why. And part of the reasons why is economics. If I'm honest, but the Canadian dollar is an issue, the tax rate's an issue, and encouraging free agents to sign for teams in Canada in a multitude of sports. The weather's an issue. But what the Raptors have done, I mean, Toronto's a sports mad market. It's the biggest market in Canada. It's one of the biggest markets in North America for the metropolitan area. If the Toronto Raptors can be successful going forward and regularly be in the playoffs, I think they're going to have a growing fan base. The hardcore will remain the hardcore. It's keeping the new fans interested in what the product is. And while I'm not an NBA fan, and I don't pretend to be, I'm not a basketball fan. I mean, what the Raptors have done changes the face of the sport in Canada and changes the direction, of the sport, because the NBA has tried outside of Toronto with Vancouver and it didn't work. So it's going to be interesting to see. But the economics is the difficult bit, because the NBA is either going to have to subsidise a Canadian team because of the Canadian dollar and some of the economics and the tax rate to get players there, or really subsidise tickets, subsidise something to grow. And it's going to be interesting to see what the NBA decides to do going forward, and how it's also to do with the TV and media rights as well. That's a big stumbling block that any potential team would have in Canada. You got to look at the Canadian dollar. You got to look at the tax rate. Ask some questions then, if there's only you. Ask some questions, sport related, or leave. It's a podcast. I'm talking about anything, and if you want to add some questions, add some questions. If you don't want to add some questions, it's up to you. That's why it's a Q&A. You ask the questions, I answer them. If they're inappropriate, you get banned. Quite simple. It's not rocket science, really. It really isn't rocket science. You don't want to participate? Fuck off. It's plain and simple. It's not hard. It really isn't. Right. In some sports news, Chris Froome. The injuries that Chris Froome sustained were more serious than initially reported. Initially reported he just broken his leg. Turns out he's broken a few more things. He's broken his neck. He's broken his leg. He's broken his elbow. He's broken his hip. He's broken some ribs. He's spent at least 6 weeks in a French hospital in Saint Etienne. He had to obviously have to have emergency surgery. It was a 6-hour operation. But wow, that's pretty big praying that. It's a training crash as well. So he was taking unnecessary risks on a training crash. I don't know really what else to say. He's a divisive figure anyway, but 6 weeks in hospital, that's a pretty big praying. What am I looking forward to over the summer? Well, I'm watching the Women's World Cup right now because that's on free-to-air TV and so it's accessible. I might be able to catch some of the Copa America in South the Copa America. Then you have you've got the Ashes later this summer as well. There's the Tour de France, and now Chris Froome's out. That really throws that open. You've got Wimbledon. So there's a fair few sporting events happening. But it's all about being able to catch the things like that. I mean, I think the most interesting story coming up is going to be the Tour de France, because Chris Froome, as I say, is going to be in hospital for 6 weeks and out for 6 months. He broke his neck, and he broke a few more things than just his neck. I mean, he broke his elbow, his hip, his ribs, his leg. He was taking, according to reports, he was taking unnecessary risks on a training run that just weren't necessary. At the end of the day, I mean, that's going to be really interesting. Cycling is a sport that obviously has had massive image problems, considering all the doping scandals and things like that over the last 20 odd years. The Lance Armstrong revelations have really damaged the image and the integrity of the sport. So every time a rider wins, there's always doubts about their integrity. And one of the most controversial riders in Chris Froome, who's a divisive figure, is now out of the Tour. It's going to be an interesting Tour de France because it's going to be so open. And as the weather, looking at the weather and how crazy it's been the last week or so, and the amount of thunderstorms and rain that Western Europe has had, the weather could have a massive bearing on how the race unfolds. It's going to have a massive bearing on a whole variety of things. It's energy sapping weather. I mean, I work in it on a daily basis, and it's not overly cold out. It's just heavy rain is so energy sapping. When you soak through it, just drains the energy out of you. So when you're cycling for up to 6 hours a day in a Tour race on a stage, that's energy sapping stuff. So the Tour de France is going to be really, really interesting to see what happens this year. The Rugby World Cup in September starts in Japan. A lot of controversy going into that tournament with individual players and nations. So that's a really interesting backstory. But there's a whole host of other things to happen over the summer. We've got tennis. Is Andy Murray going to make a comeback for Wimbledon? We know he's playing the doubles at Queen's. Is he going to be fit enough to compete at Wimbledon? That's a debating point. Is his career near the end? We've got to look at a whole host of things. I mean, the Cricket World Cup, has the most record number of games cancelled due to the rain. So they've lost a lot of games due to the weather. And the TV rights around cricket as well is a big debating point. That's a really big debating point there. I think on a sports side of things, there's a lot of things happening in the summer anyway that don't take place on a pitch or on an ice rink or on a tennis court or on a motor racing track, and that's transfers and off-season talk. So players moving clubs, managers getting sacked, managers getting hired, potential trades, drafts. If you have a draft lottery like the NHL, there's a lot of things going to be happening in the off-season for teams. There's still the NRL and State of Origin. There's a lot happening in the summer anyway. You've got the Challenge Cup semi-finals, and Halifax are in there, so there is a lot happening there. But I wouldn't say like I'm going to have a solid summer of sport. I'm just going to be following what I'm following, trying to catch what I can. The Women's World Cup has been really entertaining, to be fair. Personally, I think it's a higher quality than a lot of people want to give it credit for. Those who are dismissive of women's football, you don't have to watch it. No one's forcing you to watch it. I think what's interesting about this women's tournament is the rule variations they brought in. Handball, there's a new wording of the handball rule, the use of VAR, penalties. The goalkeeper can now not leave their line at all before the ball is struck. They have to have at least 1 foot on the line. We've already seen a goalkeeper get booked for leaving her line too early. And these things they're experimenting with, they're going to affect the Champions League and the Europa League this coming season. They're going to affect international qualifiers for the Euros. They're going to affect the Euros itself. And there's going to be a big impact on the mainstream men's game. But what am I looking forward to watching the next time? I'm not really overly looking forward to anything. I think I'm just enjoying the sport, really. I think sport is never constant thing. Obviously, the Major League Baseball is taking place in London in a couple of weeks' time, and that's already created debate about the price of tickets. You have to look at the price of tickets and online, and people are not overly happy with how much they have to pay for a ticket. Considering this is Major League Baseball's first attempt at a European market game, where they're looking at Europe and they're looking at an international series, the ticket price they're setting is pretty hot up there. The VAR, okay, VAR is a good question because I'm a big rugby league fan. It's one of my, and a big ice hockey fan. But rugby league is something because they have the TMO, Rugby union's got the TMO. I think if the referees were fully mic'd up, so everyone on the TV and in the stadium could hear, I'm surprised. How long it took FIFA to implement a video assistant or television match official kind of referee system. I think cricket's different because cricket is a slower pace sport anyway, whereby it's a completely different style of sport. It's a bat and ball sport. Yes, it is a team sport, but at the same time, you've only got two players from one side and the whole team of another on the field at any one time. You do have two umpires, but you've got a third umpire, the video umpire, up in the stands. So there's technically three officials. And all three officials have equal standing, so to speak, on their remit. So the two umpires actually out in the middle are equal of standing. Whereas football, the referee is the main official, and then the linos are your secondary officials. I don't think it necessarily the remit of VAR should change necessarily. I think that the way it's implemented with the time it takes to make a review and decision, the fact that the referees aren't fully mic'd up like they are in rugby, I think that would definitely cut out a lot of the dissent from players. Absolutely would cut out the dissent from players very, very quickly. So there'd be more respect for the officials because the players will be picked up saying things. And we've seen, obviously, players get booked for saying things. It happens a lot less in both codes of rugby. You do not see every single one of the players crying around the referee because it's not a good look. I think the time it takes to review a decision takes too long. And now that they're bringing in these new rule changes or law variations, as I'll call them, because the handball rule, the wording is changed to hitting if your arm is in an unnatural position. The penalty side of things, the goalkeeper has to stay on their line until the ball is struck. We've already seen one goalkeeper come off their line too soon and get a booking for it, and the penalty had to be retaken, even though the goalkeeper saved the penalty. The penalty had to be retaken, and then it was scored. We've seen the interpretation of when the official has to put up their flag for offside. That's changed. I think they've got to look at how many phases of play can take place before they bring play back for a VAR, how long it takes to come to a decision, and how the fans in the stadium, what do they get to see and hear? Because when it comes to cricket, when it comes to rugby league, when it comes to rugby union, the fans know what's going on because the referee is mic'd up. The big screen is part of the replay system. The referee doesn't have to run to the sideline like they do in football, so that the referee just stays in position and just looks up at the big screen and is also listening in his ear or her ear to what's been informed to them. But yeah, the VAR they need to look at how other sports effectively use a video referee or a touch TV match official kind of remit. They have to definitely look at how other sports do it. The fact that football is so far behind when it comes to using technology says all you need to know really about the direction of the game and how it's governed. Really, it took until the 2014 Men's World Cup for goal line tech to be introduced. And there was a debate about that because there's so many goals that should have been given that weren't, and vice versa. It's one of them. There was a couple of goals in this Women's World Cup that pre-2014 wouldn't have been given. So it's one of them. It's a difficult one. But I would say cricket's the wrong sport, I think, to compare it to. I think rugby union or rugby league would probably be a better kind of sport to compare football's match official video referee to. I understand what you're saying, though. The review-based system, I don't think actually is working in cricket as much as because you can only have so many a game as well. I think the review system is a massive foul up by the ICC there. I'm not a big fan of it. I think that the decision should be in the umpires and the video umpires' hands. And if the video umpire thinks, hang on a second, you might have got that decision wrong, I think every LBW decision should go straight to the video umpire. The third umpire. I really do honestly believe that every single LBW should go to the video umpire. That's my personal opinion. They do it for runouts. They do it for stumpings. I think, yeah, they should take that and take it upstairs. That's my personal opinion on that cricket one. But no, on a serious note, the VAR, it's here to stay. The amount of time and effort FIFA have put into experimenting with it, they're not going to get rid of it for a while, if ever. And the pace that technology has moved over the last 4 or 5 years, yeah, it's here to stay. It's about how they implement it, and I think you have to look at my World Cup videos that I've done and the amount of times VAR comes up in a review. I don't. I think I just take the review out of it. I don't enjoy that kind of style of cricket where you're relying on um, sticking that. No, that's not cricket for me. That's like, oh, when that's basically saying I think we should get that batsman out, because I've noticed with other batsmen who are not as necessarily the main guy to get out, they don't review. They target the review for certain batsmen. I think just take the LBW decisions upstairs straight up. And constantly have the video umpire constantly reviewing each ball. That's how I think it should work. The thing is with cricket, the cricket's got a lot of other issues right now. Lots of other issues that are not going away, and they have issues with the TV rights in various countries, especially here in the UK. It's been an ongoing debate since 2005. The TV rights to cricket. It's a big talking point. Corruption allegations within the game, match fixing allegations, corruption allegations. They're not going away either. And there's a whole host of other issues. I mean, I think the ball tampering scandal with Australia, was that an attempt to alter the outcome of the match with fixing? Possibly. A lot of allegations have come out through various media sources about backhanders. And cricket has a lot of issues more than just the review system. I think personally, for me, that I don't like the review system. I think it needs to just go and give more power to that third umpire on those egregious decisions. Personally, a third pair of eyes can't hurt. But there's a whole host of other issues within cricket that need to be sorted before we even get to the review system, which I don't think is helping the game either, because that does stop and start a game, and then you win or you keep a review if you win, or you lose a review if you only have a certain number. I think they need to get rid of that. Personally, for me, I don't think that should be part of the game. Because again, it stops the flow of the game if you're reviewing, and if it's a lengthy review, then you're there for a good couple of minutes doing nothing. Cricket is already a slower paced game compared to other sports. I just think they're putting those reviews in there have slowed the pace of cricket down. But I understand why some people like that review system. There have been some calls that have been, incorrect calls made at key times in test matches and T20s and one dayers and county level, and I completely get that. But at the same time, I mean, it can become a bit farcical, and professional sports should not be farcical, because if the professionals at the top level can't get it right, what hope does that give to the lower levels of the sport and those wanting to get involved in the sport if they see a farcical decision where it's just embarrassingly clearly wrong? It's not necessarily what I would think will help sports like cricket that have had issues with continued growth and issues with TV rights, corruption, and their image. It doesn't help, and I think there are real issues with cricket, and it's a debating point. I mean, last year when England had the Pakistan Test Series and the Indian Test Series, the price of tickets for domestic fans over overseas fans, there's issues with that as well. The ECB needs massive reform, massively, and I think the ICC needs reform as well. And I could debate this to death, but for me, the big issues are the TV rights and the corruption allegations that are regularly labelled against cricket. It's a sport that is open to match fixing. It's open to corruption. It's as if the ICC is giving lip service but doing nothing. That's my view on cricket. I mean, I'm not a fan of Sky Sports. I'm not a fan of putting sport behind a paywall. I think it reduces participation, it reduces accessibility, and it puts people off. And that's what cricket's found. Cricket's found that, and golf has found it as well. That fans are switching off because they don't want to pay X amount a month on a TV package. Young people aren't going to want to buy in. They're doing it less and less and less than their parents, or their older siblings. It's a big thing. It's TV rights, and if you put a paywall in front, less people are going to want to, pay for that privilege, so to speak, because it makes it a rich man's plaything. If you put a paywall in the way, it prices out those at the poorer end of society, those that you actually want to get involved in sport. It's a known fact, but that's my view on that side of things. Every live stream, the TV rights question comes up with sport, and the answer is always the same. I'm not a big fan of putting it behind a paywall. That's my personal opinion. A lot of people agree with it. You just have to look at social media when people go, "Oh, great, another thing behind the paywall." The only thing that's going to make a change is if people stop paying for it. Like, seriously, if people stop paying for Sky Sports subscriptions and BT Sports subscriptions, and sadly Premier Sport subscriptions, even though Premier Sport I think has got some of the better sports, then change will happen. But until then, there's an imbalance with certain teams and certain leagues getting more TV money than others. It's already been raised at UEFA level by the European leagues. There are some leagues that are going. There is a massive imbalance with. There's a massive imbalance with the TV rights. And yeah, a lot of people do illegally stream and find VPNs where there is free-to-air coverage. It sometimes means you have to watch a game in bloody Spanish because it could be for the Mexican market or the US market. But yeah, there are ways of getting a VPN and pretending you're from overseas, and you can find a free stream or a cheap stream. But that's the issue. The TV companies have created this. And the governing bodies of sports have created this rich versus poor. And it's also overinflated the wages of players, especially in football. Although other sports are starting to go the same way as well with some big contracts, but especially in football, the TV market deal for the big five leagues is so unbalanced towards the rest of European football, and the wages, I think. I don't know what you do, but I think people need to start voting with their wallets, and the TV companies might realise we've got the business model completely wrong. We're going down the wrong path when it comes to the media rights, because the latest batch of media rights for the Premier League, a fair number of games went unsold, and I think that's where the free-to-air market needs to go. We need to have a balance here between subscription TV and free-to-air TV to balance out, the TV package for the domestic market. In other countries, it is by law you have to have a balanced viewership between subscription and free to air. I know in Italy and Germany, there's a lot of free to air coverage of the Champions League, Europa League, domestic leagues, and various other non-domestic leagues of those countries. They have a lot of sport free to air. It would be unthinkable to put certain sports behind a paywall when you could have the balance between free and subscription. India versus Pakistan in the Cricket World Cup. I mean, that in itself is one of the most heated rivalries in professional sport. The weather could have a massive impact. We've seen the last week or just over the last week, really stereotypical British summer. Very heavy rain, thunderstorms, flood warnings. It's going to be interesting to see how the overcast conditions or the changeable conditions affect the swing on the ball, affects the outfield, and affect the playing surface. I think India going into this as favourites. I think India are the better side. That's my personal opinion. I think India are the better side. I think they've got the better all-round team. The T20 competition in the IPL has changed the face of cricket over the last decade or so. I think with the amount of Indian players that are, massive T20 they've adapted to it brilliantly. I think, India, for me, I think are favourites to win that. But India, Pakistan, that is the biggest rivalry in cricket. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the biggest rivalry in the world outside of the Western world, but it is definitely, when it comes to cricket, the biggest rivalry. I would say bigger than Australia England in the Ashes. I honestly believe it is the biggest cricketing rivalry out there. Um, either side could win it, but I'm going for India. That's not to say Pakistan can't win the game. I wouldn't call it an upset if Pakistan win because it's just intensity, absolute intensity, and real when the game is taking place. Absolute hatred when the game is taking place. It's the outcome of the game could be dependent on the weather though, and the weather could have a massive bearing on run rate, pace of the ball, how the bounce of the wicket, the outfield. A whole host of issues will affect how the game is played and what kind of totals is put up by the team that chooses to bat first or is put into bat first, and the chasing team, what rate they can score runs at. I think the weather will have a massive bearing. If there's any rain delays, then the Duckworth Lewis method will be used, which is really annoyingly complicated, unnecessarily so. But it's going to be interesting to see, what actually happens tomorrow. A lot of games have been called off because of the weather in the last week. And that will also affect how both teams play because they haven't been able to necessarily train or play games. So that will possibly who can get into the rhythm the quickest. It's going to be fun though. I think it will be fun. Look for the outfield to throw some surprises up. Look for the wicket to throw some surprises up. And yeah, there is a chance of rain at any point this weekend. There is a chance of a thunderstorm or a passing shower because the weather is so changeable. And this time last year, if the World Cup was this time last year, we're playing in 30+ degree heat for 40 days. So it just shows how crazy the weather is. This time last year, we had a massive long heat wave. There was a drought. There was up to, I think the hottest day was nearly 39 degrees. Now, right outside, it's about 15 degrees. It's under half the temperature of what it was this time last year. So massive fluctuation in weather conditions. But it is set. The weather is set to get better over the next few days, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. We will see what happens. I'm going for an India win. I would say they could win by, I would say, 5 wickets. But again, my history of predicting things in sport is absolutely hopeless. I think I've got a 90% failure rate when it comes to predicting sport. I mean, I think I predicted that a new team would win the Stanley Cup. The Blues have done that. Didn't predict which team. But then for the preview of game 1 of the final, I predicted the St. Louis Blues as the underdog to win, and I was right. But in all seriousness, when it comes to me predicting sporting outcomes, I'm hopeless. I'm absolutely hopeless. It's so hard. I mean, I think for me, professional sport has been so unpredictable the last 3-4 years when it comes to predicting what an outcome is going to be. That I try not to bother with it. It's got to the point where professional sport has become so unpredictable that it is what it. I mean, I thought Arsenal would beat Chelsea in the Europa League final because Unai Emery has got such a great history in that competition as a manager, and I was completely wrong. What else is there to say, really? This is the joy of professional sport. It's so unpredictable. This is why I like watching sport, because you just don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. There's already, talking about professional sport, Paul Pogba has been heavily linked with a move to Juventus, and now he says he wants to go to Real Madrid. The Paul Pogba saga, how many of these media reports are actually based on fact or speculation? And we know that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is wanting to clear out a lot of that squad and rebuild it. They've already got rid of Ander Herrera. They want to offload Sanchez. Pogba is a big question mark, and you have to look at the Man United saga and go, okay, right, where do we begin with this? Because Man United had a very dominant spell at the top of English football between 92 and I'm going to say 2013, 2014 when Fergie decided to step down. Very dominant, most dominant side in football in that period in England. It's not the case anymore. They've stood still, if not gone backwards, and a whole host of other teams have improved massively or overtaken them. And while they may have won an FA Cup and a Europa League since Ferguson left, that's only 2 trophies. I don't class the Charity Shield really as a major trophy. They have sort of stalled in their direction, and a lot of that lies with the board. A lot of that lies with Ed Woodward. And transfer policy is questionable. Scouting is questionable. And the youth system is not producing the type of player it was 10, 15 years ago. So it's going to be interesting. Okay, with the Capitals and Blues winning the last 2 Stanley Cups, I'm a Jets fan, and I would like to see the Jets do it. Obviously, last year they got to the conference final. I'm going to do a video on the teams that are yet to win their first Stanley Cup at some point. I might do that today, actually, after the first women's football game between Holland and Cameroon is done, because there's a good couple of hours gap where I can do my research, get my notes up, and go from there. It's going to be interesting because it shows just the fact the Capitals and the Blues winning shows how much parity there is in a salary cap based system. It's an interesting one. 2 new names on the cup in 2 years. I don't think the Canucks are at that level yet, where they've got a team together of youth and experience that's at the right level. I just do not think Vancouver have that team yet. I really don't. And that's not to say they've got bad players. I think, to play in the NHL, you've got to be in the top 5% of players worldwide, maybe even less than that. I think I'm a Jets fan, so I obviously that's who I want to win next. My second team is the Coyotes, the original Jets. I mean, they're the 2 teams that I would like to see win the Stanley Cup. And of course, the Jets came close last year, getting to a conference final, and it wasn't to be. But I think I've done a lot of videos on the NHL over the last couple of years, and a lot of them were to do with Vegas and what Vegas did in their first season, and a lot of people weren't happy with that. It's like, well, the amount of money the Vegas owners spent on getting the team at T-Mobile and getting a team there, they're going to want it to be successful pretty quickly. They spent $500 million on a team, which makes it more valuable as an expansion team than a quarter of the league. You're going to want it to be successful. The fact that Seattle are paying even more money, rumored to be paying more money in expansion fees, you would expect Seattle to be a pretty solid team from the get-go. But what Vegas did, I don't think is repeatable off the bat again. But anything's possible. And this is why sport's so unpredictable and so much fun to watch at times, is because of that unpredictability. And I think Vegas came close in their first season. I mean, the Capitals, that was their second ever Stanley Cup Finals appearance. They last were there in '98. So, yeah, the Blues and the Capitals, 2 teams starved of success in the playoffs. It's been a role reversal this year, because the Blues last year reversed their way out of the playoffs, and then they started the season as they finished last season. Poorly, poor form, couldn't get anywhere, and they sacked the coach. Berube comes in, they're bottom of the league, beginning of January. They win the Stanley Cup just over 6 months later. Massive turnaround. I think that's the first time ever since 1967 that a team bottom of the NHL at New Year's have gone on to lift the Stanley Cup within 6 months. I think that in itself is a story. And can they repeat themselves next year? Probably not. I think will be interesting to see how the Blues defend their Stanley Cup. Will they retain it? I don't think so. Not with the salary cap as it is. I think a lot of other teams. I mean, the Tampa Bay Lightning, for example, how they fell apart in the first round. That is the talking point of the season. That's been forgotten because of what the Blues have gone on to do. You would like to see the day when India and China take football seriously. China already does take football seriously. India, it's growing, but they've bearing in mind India, it's field hockey and cricket are far more popular, and you've got to unseat, hockey and cricket. And when I say hockey, I mean field hockey in India. China, China's an interesting one. Very, very interesting. The Chinese men's team has been to the World Cup. The Chinese women's team had some decent success in women's football, pioneers of it in the 90s. So in that aspect, China already has a serious football culture, but it's the corruption aspect, the match fixing aspect, the organised crime aspect, the fact that the guy who's running the Chinese FA is in prison, running the Chinese FA from prison. I mean, there's a lot going on. European football's got issues. The North American game has problems. The South American game has problems. Football is, I don't know where the money keeps coming from because there's only a finite amount of cash in the world. But we're seeing, I think we are seeing football reach a point now where, the money the bubble might be about to deflate a little bit. I think football's got a lot of issues with governance and integrity and corruption. There are issues there. We know about that. Let's get rid of the naivety from a lot of people. There are problems with the game, especially with governance of the game. It's a difficult one. I think. Yeah, the Chinese and Indian markets are highly. There's a lot of money there, and there's a big fan base there. There's like over 2 billion people in those two countries combined, which is like 2/7 of the world's population live in those two countries. It is, I think, an untapped resource. I think while there are fans out there, and Indians and Chinese investors have bought clubs over in Europe and invested in clubs in Europe, it is an untapped resource. But at the same time, you've got to look at the countries in question. And especially China. China's a really interesting one. There's a lot of issues with the China, because China is the interesting one to look at. India, there are two bigger established sports in India that are basically religions in India, and that's field hockey and cricket. You're not unseating them in India. You just are not. The Chinese like putting state programs in place for sport, so it'd be interesting to see how much money the Chinese government puts into it, because they're putting a lot of money into rugby union, they're putting a lot of money into rugby league, they're putting a lot of money into ice hockey. It'd be interesting to see how much money they're willing to put into football. I'm surprised China hasn't tried to bid for a football World Cup. I really am surprised that the Chinese haven't tried to put a bid in for FIFA's greatest tournament. I am really stunned. The fact that Japan and Korea got a World Cup in Asia before China. That's stunning to me. But look, at the end of the day, I think both markets are untapped in the sense that they are undervalued by the main markets. But at the same time, while there are fan bases of clubs out in India and China where there are football fans. India is I don't think they will take football as seriously as cricket and field hockey. I think they're well behind in that aspect. China, the government has a lot of control over the sports side of things in China, a lot of control over the direction of sport. And that's up for the Chinese government to liberalise some of their sports rules. I mean, we know the Chinese Super League is there, and some big name players have gone over to China to finish their careers. But they're going to China at a stage in their career where they're well past their best and they're close to retirement. So I don't know. The Chinese government has a big say on how sport is run. and there are state programs in place for a variety of sports. But China, you got to look at the sports they are good at, and you look at the Olympic Games, and then you look at the sports that they put a lot of funding in. There's your answer where football lies with the Chinese. The women on the women's side of the game, women's game, they are one of the top consistently. They were one of the pioneers of women's football in the 90s. Big funding put in. But there are corruption issues within the Chinese system. And I think until that kind of corruption is erased out, that's one thing. Plus, the human rights abuses is another. And human rights issues is another reason why the market is as untapped as it is. There is a KHL team in the KHL. The NHL are taking pre-season games there in the ice hockey. So another major global sport is looking at China as a potential expansion market. That they are going after Chinese money and trying to get fans on board. But it is what it is, and we'll have to see what happens. I am very surprised that China hasn't taken the step to get a World Cup yet. Really surprised, because the infrastructure is there. The infrastructure in China is there. But it is what it is. It's whether the corporations would want, the big sponsors would want to associate a World Cup in a country that has such questionable human rights record. But then again, they've been to South Africa. They've been to Argentina during the Dirty War. They've been to Russia. A World Cup in China isn't that as far fetched as people think. Aussie rules, yeah, they have taken games to Shanghai. That's interesting. I do know they took a couple of games to Shanghai, but at the same time, there is a big Chinese community in Australia. So in that sense, I can see why. Plus, the Australians now take part in things like the Asian Games and Asian qualifying for FIFA tournaments, both men and women's, because they were just battering Oceania. So they moved Australia into the Asian qualifying groups. There is a link with China economically and politically. The human rights issues, honestly, that's down to the sponsors. That's not down to FIFA. FIFA would love to go to China because they know there's an untapped market of over 1 billion people, where the media is state control, where they can just go, look, just broadcast FIFA stuff. It's the corporations that are like, especially FIFA sponsors that are Hyundai and Kia, two sponsors of FIFA, are Korean, and Korea and China, South Korea and China aren't the best of friends. I think the corporate money that sponsors FIFA is a bit like, we don't want you to go there. FIFA itself would happily take China in a heartbeat. Absolutely. They took Qatar. They took Russia. They've been to Argentina in the 70s when Argentina had the dirty war where they were just rounding people up middle of the night and disappearing them. They have been to countries that have had really dubious human rights records in the past. Mexico, the first Mexican World Cup took place after a military coup in '68. Yeah, they have been to some countries that have had some very dubious human rights records, but all the countries they went to weren't communists. So that was the Cold War era. The modern era, yeah, they've been to Russia. They are going to Qatar. They've been to South Africa, obviously a country that has had apartheid and has still got human rights abuses. I think it's more to do with the corporations, and because China is still communist, a lot of the big sponsors don't, even though they are allowed free market economics in China, there's still a lot of state control. It's a state-controlled free market system, so it's sort of balanced social capitalism, but it's the one-party state, and it's the fact that, yeah, China is a pretty repressive regime. If you speak out against the Chinese government, you are in trouble. And I think FIFA is sort of, with all the allegations that have come out about corruption about FIFA, they're a little bit more wary now. The Knock Dog, good day. Does the Premier League? The Premier League has no overseas games. There were plans; they were quickly shelved when the backlash from fans was such that it was unsellable to the British fan base. La Liga obviously wanted to take games to the US. Players threatened to go on strike, and fans really said no. While the North American system is franchise-based and they do take games on the international series, as they call it, the European and South American sports systems are club-based and the club is community. Whereas a franchise, you can just, the team sucks here. The fans in San Diego aren't supporting the Chargers. We'll move them to LA. That's sort of how it works in North America. The fans aren't turning up. We'll move the team. That's how it works in North America, the franchise system. In Europe and South America, it's a club-based system where the club is community, is part of a community. You can't just do that. There were talks of it, and the reaction from fans when they did surveys was no. What? No, you can't do that. But there is the debate. Well, the North American leagues are bringing games over to Europe, and the international series like the NFL, Major League Baseball, NHL, and NBA are bringing games to Europe. They're franchise-based systems. If the owner wants to move the team and the league agrees to it, they can move the team to whatever city they want to, as long as it makes them money. That's because Copa America, the Copa America, because Guyana and Suriname and do not take part as part of the South American grouping, they take part as part of the Caribbean CONCACAF. It has an odd number of teams. So to even it out, you want to add a couple of teams in there to even out the numbers. Qatar, I think, are in there because they're they're the next World Cup hosts, and Australia are in there. I think Australia should just join the South American qualifying for World Cups and Copa America, because they've been moved into the Asian qualifying system. They kept winning Oceania. I think Australia would benefit more from playing more quality opposition if they were to join the South American system. They're in the Southern Hemisphere, so it's that time of year where the conditions are right. I think they would be playing against more quality technical players. The Argentinians, Brazilians, and Uruguayans, most of their top players play in Europe, but the domestic leagues in Chile and Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, all that kind of thing, they do play at a reasonably high standard. They have some really good technical players. The money's less than in Europe. The clubs are worth less, but you have to look at the standard of play. It's actually surprisingly good fun to watch the South American leagues. I think they get a lot of poor coverage over in Europe. I think we should have more coverage of the South American leagues. They are really fun to watch. We have on the Premier Free Sports Network over here in the UK, we get coverage of South American football, and it's bananas. We've got a TV rights package for the Copa America this year. It is absolute bananas. The fans are nuts. The technical ability of players is there. I think it should be sold more, because some of the best players to win the World Cup were playing in South America when they won the World Cup. You just have to look at Brazil, 1970. The whole team was based in Brazil. Argentina, 78. Only, I think, a couple of players were based outside of Argentina. Argentina in 86. Again, apart from Maradona and Burruchaga and a couple of other players, based in Argentina. I mean, I think Kempes was one of only two players in the 78 winning side to be playing for Valencia. The rest were all based in Argentina. So South American football is at its best when it's got more domestically based players. That's my personal opinion. I think European football has damaged the South American style. The South American style is freewheeling, going forward, and cynical in defence. I love South American football. I've always loved South American football. I've seen a lot of the Brazilian and Argentinian leagues when I was in Italy, and I've watched a lot of what they do, and it is good quality stuff. I think the issue with Australia is the A-League. It's a franchise-based system. There's no promotion relegation. You look at you have to look at the European and South American system, where it's promotion relegation, and the quality of football is higher than North America and Australia. It is higher. You have to look at the players that have been produced and the quality level. And South America, football is a religion. Football is an utter religion in South America. While the leagues may not be on necessarily the same high standard as the top 5 European leagues, a South American side could easily slot into any one of those leagues and not get relegated. They have the quality to stay up in the Premier League, in League One, in La Liga, in Serie A, in the Bundesliga. You could get some of the top South American sides and slot them in, and they would survive. They would still be there at the end of the season, maybe mid-table, maybe top half, but they would be there. The style of play is different in South America than it is in Europe. And what I find strange is South American teams play best when they've got more domestically based players. But of course, the best players go to Europe because of, that's right, money. And there are issues with the finances of South American football. The Argentinian league is broke. The Argentinian Federation is broke. The Brazilian Federation is just, corruption allegation after corruption allegation. Uruguay just doesn't have the population to sustain their best players because the money isn't there. Ecuador's got a decent average. Ecuador and Chile, they play at altitude a lot of the time. So, not every player can adjust that altitude without having issues of altitude sickness. Peru, not a great league as it used to be. Colombia, obviously, with the political violence in Colombia, that affects, the league somewhat. It's not as bad as it was 20, 30 years ago, but that's had an effect on the league in Colombia. Venezuela is just political crisis right now. Paraguay is not the biggest league, but the quality of players that come out of South America and the top players that end up going to Europe is there for all to see. They keep producing players, brilliant world-class players. And there's lots of players in South America who are not household names who are absolutely brilliant technically, who are overlooked. I'm not going to lie, there are a lot of really good players in the Southern Hemisphere. Oh yeah, no, CONCACAF is a joke, but the fact that the US failed to qualify says everything you need to know about the state of North and Central American football right now. The fact that Panama got out of that qualifying section and not the US says everything you need to know about the state of the game in North America. And the quality level of football in North and Central America. It's just Mexico notwithstanding. It's not great. I mean, Honduras just get to World Cups and do nothing. Mexico are the best team at the moment. Yeah, and should they be part of South American qualifying? Possibly. But Costa Rica, I think, are the second best Central American team, and they're ahead of the US now. And when you got Honduras is better than the US, that really says something's gone horribly, horribly wrong. Because the money in the US, that shouldn't be the case. The MLS, I've watched the MLS, and it's actually been quite entertaining. But a lot of their players are Mexican or of Latino descent, of like Dominica or Guatemala. And a lot of the players from the CONCACAF region aren't classed as overseas, and there's not enough homegrown American talent. A lot of it is Latino Central American players playing in the MLS. A lot of them, and they're not classed as overseas players because they're from the CONCACAF region. That tells you all you need to know. The best players in the MLS aren't US. They're Central Americans. There's your answer. I like watching the MLS on Free Sports because we get free-to-air coverage over here on the Free Sports Network, which is part of a small sports network called Premier Sports. It does say a lot that the Australians would rather choose European football if they are going to play overseas than North America. I think Harry Kewell went to the US at one point, but it does say a fair reflection of where the MLS is right now. It's good fun to watch. I'm not disputing it's a good watch, and the fans are buying into it. I'm not disputing that it's a decent quality league. Is it the same as European football and South American football? No. If you put the top MLS sides against even a mid-rate Brazilian side from the Brazilian league, they're getting hammered. That's my personal opinion. They're not on the same level technically, defensively. And if you the failure of the US national sides to get to the last World Cup, I've watched a documentary on more of a panel show, but I watched a few programs on the failure. And yeah, there was a lot of debating point about the state of the men's game. The fact that the women's side is more successful than the men's and creates more revenues tells you all you need to know, really, about the state of play. The fact the women's Australian team is more successful than the men's, as well as says its own tale. But yeah, there are issues with the US men's side. I mean, I think there are issues with below the MLS. So when you've got the MLS, you've got to look at the minor leagues and then player development, because a lot of kids want to play the game. The fans are there. The kids want to play both men's and women's games. The fan base is there. The playing base is there. It's getting the right skills in place and the right production line in place. And does a franchise? Yeah, there is the women's side of things. There is a big, strong collegiate system. It is a collegiate sport in the US, but it is lagging far behind baseball, basketball, American football, and ice hockey. They are, and even rugby's, I think, got a better collegiate system than football. Well, you would call it soccer, but there is a definite issue with getting grassroots youth football and then linking it in with an MLS system and an affiliate system below that. I did a video on the history of the MLS. In the first decade or so of the MLS's existence, teams were going out of business. They were struggling for money. It was when David Beckham, David Beckham, I think, is the trigger, the catalyst to him. He was a global brand then. He's still a global brand now, and he's got his own team. David Beckham going to the MLS, to the LA Galaxy, changed the state of play. First real big name European player to go over. Players like Kaká, Andrea Pirlo, others of lesser or equal step. A lot of others have now followed where Dave Beckham led, and yeah, he came at the right time. He may not be the world's greatest player, but at the time he was, in the public consciousness. He came at the right time for the MLS. Had he gone a few years earlier or a few years later? No, it doesn't work. It worked at the time he went. It created media interest. There was a soccer football fan base already in the US, and of course that encouraged more people to want to play the game, more people to want to watch the game, because he was a household name. The issue is getting that youth development from grassroots through the system to the top level. And there's an issue. It's a franchise-based system. The MLS is not a bad watch. It is fun. It's a very open style of football. Defending is not the best, but it is kind of a decent watch if you want to watch it. At the same time, it's not always of the highest quality. There's a lot of misplaced passes. The final ball into the box is not necessarily the best. The finishing can be a bit wayward, but it's not the worst product I've ever seen as a sports fan. I've seen worse. The A-League, I think the A-League, again, it's the size of player base and the sports it's got to compete against. Rugby league is and the AFL are the two main sports down under, and there is a massive gap in quality and player base. While it is there, and the A-League is there, and it is getting better. I'm not disputing that. And there are some decent quality Australian players floating around the European leagues. It's not where it needs to be. And Australia's a sports mad nation, and Australia needs some positive sports headlines at the moment. Oh, my head. Oh no! I mean, Australia's had so much off-field scandal with a variety of sports over the last, I'm going to say last decade, because the peptide scandal with Essendon and Cronulla, that's still ongoing. I think with the issues with all the NRL shenanigans with Jack de Belin and other players, the issues with Israel Folau and the ongoing saga there, Australian sport needs a feel-good story. And Australia's women are giving it a good crack in the Women's World Cup. They've won one, they've lost one, but they're giving it a good crack, and they're ranked 6th in the world. So, but the ironic thing is, only one of the Australian starting 11 in their first game against Italy plays in Australia. The rest mostly play in the US in the women's system. And I'm being serious. This is what I've noticed. The Australian women's national side, the Matildas, their first game against Italy, only one of their starting lineup played domestic football in Australia. Most, not all, most played in North America, in the US system, and the US collegiate and league system. That tells you all you need to know about the state of the sport as a whole, when on the women's side of things, they're the 6th best team in the world on world rankings, which I know are flawed, but only one of the team plays domestic football at home. That tells you everything you need to know. Whereas on the Italian side of things, 10 of the Italian starting lineup play in Italy. Complete role reversal. That tells you all you need to know about the health of a sport domestically, and where a sports direction is going. The men's national side, I don't know the Socceroos, how many of the Australians actually play in Australia, but I wouldn't have thought it would be many. I would have thought most would be plying their trade in Europe. And again, that creates an issue when you have to get the squad together. If they're so dispersed around the world, it does create problems when you've got to, select players when they're all over the world. I think the A-League will get there, but it's got to compete against the NRL and the AFL, which have got far bigger playing bases and fan bases. They're far, far ahead. I would say it's. I wouldn't say, I'll say most Australian players who are eligible to play for Australia play in Australia, obviously. But a lot play in Germany. There's a fair few floating around Scotland and England. But yeah, there is an issue where the best players are being lost to the game domestically, and they're going overseas. They're being developed overseas, or they want to play their careers overseas. And when it comes to getting a team together for a tournament or a qualifier or an international friendly, they're all over the place, and that's got to be a headache for the coaching system, the coaching staff, the player development staff, the FA, or the Australian Federation. That's got to be a head scratcher. In trying to get all those disparate players, back together. Yeah, there is. Well, I wouldn't say they're minor clubs. I think the Scandinavian leagues, the money isn't as good, but they're playing at a level that they should be playing at. They're getting regular minutes, they're getting regular games, they're playing matches, they're competing for places, and I think that's what you need when you're a professional sportsman. It doesn't matter the level you're at. I think it's more like you get to do what you love. I mean, the Scandinavian leagues, the money isn't necessarily there, and there was a meeting with UEFA about the financial state of the game in Europe. And some of the Scandinavian leagues, I think especially the Finnish league, came out and said, "Look, we're going to go bust soon. We're going to run out of money." And they've been very critical of the state of finances in Europe. And yeah, the TV deals are heavily biased towards 5 leagues. It says all you need to know, really, about the state of the financial state of play and the direction that leagues are going in. The A-League could become more competitive. I'm surprised Australia has never managed to get a men's World Cup. I think they've definitely got the stadiums to host a tournament. The infrastructure's there. I'm surprised Australia and New Zealand haven't had a joint bid for a World Cup. I'm really surprised. They've done it for rugby league. They've done it for rugby union. I'm really, really surprised they haven't, looked at another global sport and gone, we will have a World Cup, because the infrastructure's there. They won't have to do a lot of rebuilding work on stadiums. there's a whole host of stadiums in Sydney. You've got the new Westbank Stadium. You've got ANZ, which is being refurbed. You've got the Sydney Cricket Ground, where you could put a football pitch kind of thing in there. You've got Shark Park. You've got Penrith. You've got some of the suburban grounds that could have a few bits and pieces done to them, but they're already there. You've got Suncorp in Brisbane. You've got the Gold Coast Stadium. You've got Cairns, Townsville. You've got Perth. You've got Adelaide. You've got a whole host of things. And Australia has the infrastructure, and New Zealand's got the infrastructure as well. They've hosted a Rugby World Cup, so the infrastructure's there. It's the willingness. It's not hard. The infrastructure, they don't have to do too much rebuilding. They've got the stadiums. The Raptors, this is a thing I want to do a video on. Is where the NBA takes its direction in Canada now. A lot of the people in Canada who suddenly got on the old Raptors bandwagon there are actually ice hockey fans, the NHL fans. And because the Canadian teams crashed out of the playoffs in the Stanley Cup in the Jets, Flames and Maple Leafs, a lot of their fans were like, well, we've got no sport to watch. And a lot of them were Maple Leafs fans. The proof will be in the pudding with the Raptors is if they remain successful for a period of time, get back to the playoffs this coming season, do well in those playoffs, but also the regular season numbers of viewership. That's where we see how successful this championship has been for the Raptors. I think the NBA needs to look at the Canadian market and go, we could get a lot of growth here. But they've been here with Vancouver as well, and that didn't work out in Vancouver with the NBA. So it's an interesting one. I was waiting for someone to ask. I wouldn't say the Raptors have had no fans, but there's clearly more fans than just in the Toronto area. And the issue with the NBA is they've only got the one team in Canada, whereas the MLS and the NHL have more teams in Canada. They've realised that outside of Toronto, there are fan bases. Obviously, ice hockey is the national sport. The NHL is a religion in Canada. You've got 7 top quality teams. Well, I say that because the Senators, we're not even sure what's going on with them. You look at Major League Soccer, Canadian sides have done really well at the MLS. And I know the MLS is the 5th major league, so to speak, in North America, but they've gone to Canada, they've gone to Toronto, they've gone, I believe, Vancouver. I think Montreal's got a team. They've looked and they've gone, we're going here. We know there's a fan base here. The issue, I think, the NBA, it's a tricky one in Canada. The Raptors have had always, look, it's Toronto. They will support anything. They will support a team even if it's absolutely hopeless. The issue is building the sport outside of the Toronto metropolitan area in the rest of Canada, because they've tried in Vancouver and it didn't work. It's going to be interesting how they market the NBA in Canada now, and can the Raptors continue to be successful? If the Raptors have a shocking season this coming season and can't replicate, how many of those fans that are new fans will stick around? What will the TV viewership figures look like in the regular season? These are all questions that we'll find out over the next 12 to 24 months. And if the Maple Leafs actually get out the first round of the playoffs and the Raptors get out the first round of the playoffs, which team will be more popular? That is a real question. But yeah, they've upset the apple cart, absolutely. But for me, the NBA isn't a league that I watch. Basketball isn't a sport that I enjoy, and I'm not being negative about it. I understand why people do watch it and why people, enjoy basketball. I also don't see the NBA being brave enough to take another team to Canada, be it a relocation or expansion. And there are reasons for this. It's not because of lack of fans. We know that there are basketball fans in Canada. We know there are casual fans in Canada that if a team was in their city, they would definitely 100% support that team. Economics. It's the Canadian dollar, because the wages are paid in US dollars. So it's the Canadian dollar on the exchange rate. It's the tax system. It's the weather. If you were to, we've seen this in the NHL with free agency. Teams have struggled to sign big name free agents because of those 3 things: the Canadian dollar, the tax system, and the weather. Those the weather is the worst excuse I've ever heard for people not wanting to go play for a team for money. But hey, it does have an impact. But the Canadian dollar uh, and economics. The NBA, I wouldn't say there's no reason. I mean, they've been to Vancouver before. They've had more than one team in Canada. It's getting it to work. It is getting it to work because there is an untapped fan base in other cities in Canada. They cannot just have the Raptors um, to sustain a whole country worth of people because then you get limited ticket sales. You actually they only can only sell so many tickets a year. The TV ratings as well. The TV, how the media rights in Canada, how the NBA signs a media deal could be important. Yeah, I think a lot of that is to do with economics because the salaries are actually paid in US dollars, not Canadian dollars, and the fluctuation of the Canadian dollar right now is really weak compared to the US dollar. So in that aspect, on the exchange rate, the player loses money. Plus, the tax system is really a higher for high earners is higher in Canada, and that puts off players as well. Um, and then the team's profit margins, because of that fluctuation of what the Canadian dollar is actually worth. Yeah, the team will be making less money. But why would you want to leave a winning team? That's what gets me with some of these players. They want to leave a winning team. I don't get it. But I'm not an NBA fan. I'm more of an ice hockey fan. Other sports are looking at the Canadian market, like rugby league and rugby union. We've got the Toronto Wolfpack, and Ottawa are going to get a team at some point in the next couple of years. There are big plans to get a team in Ottawa in the British rugby league system and a team in New York. So other sports are looking at that part of the world. Non-traditional sports are looking at that part of the world and are willing to take the risk of putting a team there. Down the line, the NBA may regret not having a second team in Canada. We won't know. Hindsight's a great thing. We can't predict what's going to happen in the next 5 years. I think the NBA, if they market things right, and if they were, because the NBA is one of the wealthiest leagues in the world. If they were to subsidize a location, Vancouver could work. The amount of people I've seen on social media following the Raptors win who want their team back in Vancouver says there is a fan base there. The NBA got it wrong, and I can look at why the NBA failed in Vancouver. There's a whole host of reasons why it failed. The issue I think with the NBA is and Canada is the size of market, and I use this size of market. That's I think where the issue lies. Truly for the NBA, the NHL can make ice hockey work in Canada. Yes, it is the national sport, but in viewership terms, a lot of these markets are classed as small markets that wouldn't work in the US. But it's all about how you market it. Really, it is all about how you advertise what is there. I mean, we could discuss the NBA to death. I mean, I'm not a fan of basketball myself. That's not to say that it's not a good sport. It's not a competitive sport. It's not a fun sport. But for me, it's not a sport that I find entices me. I mean, I will watch casually. I've watched games in the past, but for me, I think it's not something that sparks interest in me. I will watch it casually, absolutely. I will happily sit there and watch a game, but I can't be as invested as rugby league, rugby union, ice hockey, and to a certain extent football. I think football for me is not as enjoyable as what it was when I was younger. I think I'm not enjoying it as much as I used to. But last year's World Cup was great fun to watch, and this Women's World Cup has actually been quite good fun. I'm getting kind of bored of the narrative that it sucks because it doesn't. It's a different style of football. To compare women's football to the men's game is stupid because it's not the same style. It's different technique. It's different skill level. Doesn't mean it's not entertaining to watch. But golf has its own issues. Golf, well, they put the sport behind a paywall, haven't they? And golf is now struggling to stay healthy. Lots of people have switched off golf because it's not accessible on free-to-air TV here in the UK. I don't know what golf is like around the world to view, but it's losing fans in the UK rapidly. People are switching off. I used to work at a golf course. I live down the road from Wentworth, so the PGA, when it's on, it does bring money into the local community. A lot of people do go to watch. It's a big sporting event, and it's local. But I don't really have the same feeling for golf that I used to. I used to really love watching golf and playing it, and now I don't. So it is what it is. Baseball, we could discuss the Major League Baseball with the Yankees and the Red Sox, coming to play 2 games in London later this month. The ticket price is big debating point, and the TV rights. Who's going to cover the Major League Baseball? That's the debate there. We'll get as we get closer to the Major League Baseball games, we'll debate the pros and cons of the fact that Major League Baseball was meant to come here in 2017 and pulled out at the last minute, and why they are so late on the overseas expansion into Europe, whereas the other major leagues were well ahead of the Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball is a league that's had a lot of issues with the juicing of the ball scandal. And a few betting scandals and some other issues. Lots of player strikes in back in the day that have affected the image of the sport in America and globally. But we can discuss baseball another time. Rugby league. Well, the Toronto Wolfpack has got private backing, big money. There are plans to get a team in Ottawa. There is a semi-pro league that does play on the east coast of the US and Canada. So there are people who want to play and watch the game. And Major League Rugby is working as well, which is the rugby union equivalent. People are buying into that, and the corporations are willing to spend the money. So I think North America is an untapped market, and they're willing to take the risk. The Pro 14 in South Africa, they've already got the 2 weaker franchises. Super Rugby's in a mess. Rugby union at club level is in a mess, and international level, rugby union's got problems. Rugby league has its own issues, but I think club level, the fact there are issues with the Super League. I'm not hiding that fact. But Major League Rugby in Rugby Union North America has been fun to watch this season. I haven't watched as many games as I would like, but I've watched a fair few games this year, and I have been entertained. I have enjoyed what I have seen. The last couple of weeks with my new job, by the time I get in and the matches get posted on YouTube, I want to go to bed, to be honest. I mean, I start really early in the morning, and by 3-4 in the afternoon, I want to go to bed most days. So I've already been up since 4:30 this morning. So for me, this is nearly my lunchtime. I've been up for 5-6 hours already because it's my body clock. The rugby league side of things, the Toronto Wolfpack's got financial backing. Ottawa, I think they're going to be putting a team in Ottawa. I do honestly think it would be better for rugby league if they would just have a North American competition in Canada and the US on the East Coast. We know there's a semi-pro league there. We know people want to play the game and watch the game. I think that is the ultimate goal, is to make the game professional on the East Coast of the US. That's where the player base is and the fan base is. I'm not sure how sustainable it is in Super League. But we'll see. Super League's got its own issues. It needs a success, more growth in the south of England. The French side of things, the fact that Toulouse and in fact Toronto were priced out of competing in this year's Challenge Cup, created a lot of criticism, a lot of negativity about the fact that Catalan holders were like, we're not going to pay that kind of money to re-enter a competition we're the holders of. And when they refused to pay the money, Super League panicked, and the Rugby Football League panicked. Because the RFL has been losing money. The RFL needs to expand in the south of England. That's where the money is. I honestly think, though, that there are issues with both codes of rugby financially. the Pro 14 side of things, the Cheetahs and the Kings aren't the best sides to come out of South Africa. There was a reason why they're no longer in Super Rugby. They were appalling in Super Rugby. Super Rugby's got its own problems. There's money issues with rugby union around the world, let alone just in Super Rugby. The Sunwolves being axed, that's gone down like a lead balloon. Issues with Australian rugby union, which have been discussed to death on the channel over the last couple of months. Rugby unions have got a lot of problems. Professionalism is the negative side of professionalism. The money just is not there that was expected to be there when they decided to turn the game professional in 1995 at the top level. It hasn't transpired as anticipated, and there are money problems, massive money issues. Even in a rugby mad country like New Zealand, there are problems because guess what? There's only so many people living in this part of the world. The population sizes are smaller, stadiums are half filled. And yeah, there are definite money issues. I mean, I don't know how long it can continue like this. I really don't. But we'll have to see what happens. I mean, I don't know how long Super Rugby can be sustainable. That's an interesting point. Is Super Rugby? We can debate rugby league going to North America, but there is money in North America, and they want to support and play rugby league. Rugby union is where I think there's more money issues globally. Super League does have issues with money and growth of the game, and this is where I think the London Broncos staying in the Super League is vital. Plus the TV deal that is agreed coming up when the current deal I think runs out in 2021. I think that's when all the TV rights get put up for renegotiation. There needs to be more free-to-air coverage of rugby league in this country. They have it in Australia. I have a good balance between pay-per-view and free-to-air. There definitely needs to be better TV rights deal, because to have a whole league put on Sky, it's just not good enough. And there's not enough fans to sustain it anyway. I mean, that's my personal opinion on the state of finances of rugby league. I mean, the NRL is so far ahead. It's not even a comparison anymore. The player quality and player depth is far higher down under than it is in Europe. I honestly do believe that. I honestly do believe that the state of play, the current state of how things are looking, the Super League is lagging behind in a whole host of areas. It's not even a contest anymore. Personally, I think Super League is struggling compared to the NRL on almost every level. But that's my personal opinion. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Super League can't become the NRL's equal. But when the best English players are going to play, in the NRL, we've just lost Callum Watkins. Is gone over to the NRL. He starts with the Gold Coast Titans on the 1st of July. That's when his contract starts with the Titans. Yeah, the fact that the best English players are going over there, it tells you all you need to know really about the state of rugby league in this country. Ryan Hall, he's gone over there. I think Ryan Hall's got a bit late in his career, but he's gone. Callum Watkins, former teammate, he's gone. You've got Bateman, Sutton, Hodgson, the Burgess brothers, James Graham. There's more. Others have tried and failed, but Gareth Widdop played his entire career in the NRL. George and Tom Burgess played their entire careers in the NRL. So the best English players are playing down under. Says all you need to know. it wasn't always the case. Honestly, some of the best Australian players played over here back in the day, but it's it is what it is. I mean, I think. Well, I don't have Sky, so I'm not going to be able to watch any of the US Open. I used to love watching the Masters, but the coverage of the Masters on free to air is less. I think we get the last day now on free to air. There is no other coverage on free to air TV now because the BBC have just lost the rights slowly but surely. The Open itself, Sky. The US Open's always been on Sky though, as far as I can remember. But golf has this issue where the free to air coverage is so limited that people are switching off. They are switching off, and it's slowly but surely, the sport needs to look at itself and the TV rights agreed, because it's not sustainable putting it behind a paywall because people just are not watching in the numbers that they were when the Open was fully on free to air, when the Masters, all 4 rounds of the Masters were on free to air. The numbers just aren't there for viewership, and it's a declining viewership, and it's going to continue to decline. It's just not sustainable, really, and that's the problem. That is the problem. Not enough people want to get involved in golf anymore. Not enough people want to watch it, and part of that is to do with the media rights and the fact that when Murdoch was running Sky in this country, it was put behind a paywall. They bought up all the rights as quickly as possible for a variety of sports, and if Comcast, with their restructuring of Sky, come the TV rights renewal phase, which is in a couple of years' time, a lot of professional sports, not just here in the UK, but across the world, with the Murdoch businesses and the TV rights discussions, which all happen around 2021. And it's not just the Murdoch TV companies; it's a whole host of subscription and free-to-air networks with the TV rights being renegotiated in the next couple of years. This could be the moment that the bunny bubble in professional sport starts to burst or deflate, because salaries now for team players and prize money for the individual sports like golf and tennis have gone up. How sustainable is that? Ticket prices for events have gone up. The average person's wage has not. And that's where sustainability comes into it. When the average fan just cannot afford to access or go to watch a day's golf, a round's golf at, let's say, Wentworth at the PGA, or be able to go to their local football club and watch a team. There you go. That's my personal opinion. I do honestly believe that the sustainability of professional sport at the top level, the players have got too greedy. The TV companies have been raking the money in, and I think ripping off the average fan for too long. And now people are starting to talk with their wallets and their feet, and it's affecting, because it seems now that professional sport is a rich man's hobby and a poor man's dream, and that's not good. That is not good when it becomes unsustainable for the average fan to go to a game a couple of times a season. You've got you've got it wrong. There's an issue with the business model. The amount of professional sports teams in financial difficulty, it's mind-boggling how it's all been, how the TV rights are organised, because the average fan feels priced out, and the average fan is your key customer. If you turn those average fans off that want to participate by viewing or taking up the sport, you lose something. And I think professional sport has started to lose a lot of what made it good, a lot of what made it fun to watch and participate in. It's losing a bit of the atmosphere, and it's becoming a rich man's plaything and a poor man's dream, and that shouldn't be the case. Should not be the case. That's where golf's going wrong. And golf is already seen as a rich man's sport anyway. It is. It's got an image issue. Golf golf and cricket have these image issues where they're seen as posh boy sports. And yeah, it's a problem. I have seen obviously footage on the internet of the Raptors, celebrations. Yeah, imagine if the Raptors had lost that series, what would have happened to Toronto? There's been a few things happen in Canada with sports teams when they lose and the fans going on to riot. Look at Vancouver in 2011 in the NHL. The UK, basketball for me is not a sport that I actively enjoy. I will casually watch a game every now and then. I'll casually tune into an NBA game, but again, in this country, it's behind a paywall. It's behind Sky Sports, and I don't have Sky Sports, and I don't want to pay the money for Sky Sports. I can't afford Sky Sports, and I think, as I said previously, it's professional sport now is becoming a rich man's plaything and a poor man's dream, because the average fan is being priced out of watching and wanting to get involved. They cannot afford to go to games. They cannot afford to pay for the TV packages. And while the scenes in Toronto were amazing, and they put big screens up, and the way the Canadian fans bought into it across the whole country were great to see. But at the same time, do we get that here? I think there's an apathy here now. There is a massive apathy to the whole thing. I mean, I suppose Leicester City win the Premier League. There were similar scenes in Leicester. You could say, it didn't. It really didn't. I mean, Leicester winning the Premier League, I think, it was as close as we got to crazy scenes like that. But at the same time, I think there's an apathy with fans these days. I think there really is a general apathy and okay, yay. I think there really is. I think there's a lot. I think society at the moment's in a strange place, and sports fans in this country are very apathetic and quite cynical about a lot of things. I wouldn't necessarily say London is the only good looking city, I think, but there are issues with a whole host of places. But no, there is generally an apathy and a cynicism from British fan bases at the moment for sport. There is a general apathy. I think there's more of a frustration, and it's always the same teams winning year after year, generally speaking, and so fans of other teams don't have that opportunity to have that celebration and that trophy parade. That's where I think Leicester were the last team that I can think of in this country where the fans went absolutely bananas. That's my personal opinion on why it doesn't happen as much in the UK. But you look at Ajax with their celebrations; they were bananas, because it's been a Feyenoord league for a while, and Ajax Feyenoord's been a bit of a thing. Who's the best football player of all time? For me, it's Pele, but the debate is constantly ongoing. You can only really say the best of all time when you look at their body of work when they've retired. If a player is still currently going, there could be some kind of incident, or something happens which damages their reputation. But for me, it's Pele. But the debate's out there. If you want to talk about Pele, I think, is the ultimate greatest goal scorer of all time. But then you got to look at other players who score a lot less goals, but are equally as skillful, if not more so. And there's a whole host of them, and I could list them off, and a lot of them are before your time. So I don't want to bore you to death with the history of football that I know. The Premier League having a draft system. A draft system won't work in a club-based system. It only works in a franchise-based system. That's why we do not have one. Also, a draft system goes against EU employment law, so that's why there is no draft system in European leagues. The reason why a draft system works in the North American system, and to a certain extent with the AFL in Australia, is there's no promotion, relegation, and there is a collegiate system below, and there's also minor leagues below. The draft system, though, it's sort of it does work, but it doesn't, because a lot of the European players play in leagues where there isn't a draft system. And when they're drafted, they end up playing in the league they've been drafted from for a couple more seasons. The draft system, though, it's an interesting one. Some draft years are really weak and some are really, really good. It's an interesting system to have, but it's a different system compared to our system. In the UK and in Europe and in South America, it's a club-based system where when you join a youth team, it's generally in a youth system of a big senior men or women's club, and you work your way through the youth ranks through to the senior level, and the club is part of the community. The franchise system in North America, if an owner thinks they're not making enough money or the team generally sucks, they will propose to move the team to a location where they can make money, and it's a franchise system. So it's a different system altogether. I've done a video on the channel debating the difference in sports cultures. A draft system wouldn't work in a European sports culture. It's just fact. What are my thoughts on Barcelona? Interesting club. La Liga needs to become more competitive, personally, in my view. Barcelona, interesting club. They did used to have the overseas player rule where they were limited in the amount of overseas players they were allowed to sign. So when Maradona was there, I think it was they were only allowed to have 4 overseas players in the entire squad. That rule has now changed somewhat. But to be honest, I'm not a fan of Spanish league football. While the players have great technical ability, it's such an uncompetitive league that there's only 1 of 3 teams at the moment that are going to be in the running for the title, and that doesn't necessarily breed the best quality of football. The Copa America, they've opened up the Copa America to guest nations, because in South America there is an odd number of teams for qualification, because Guyana and Suriname take part in CONCACAF. And even then, if they were part of the qualification system, it would still be an odd number of teams because of the amount of nations in South America. So they invite teams like Australia and Japan to participate in the Copa America to even out. The thing is, it's an interesting one. People are laughing, but I honestly think it's not a bad thing. It's just how they do that. It's something that the South American Federation has decided to do. There's a shortage of cash in South American football. They need to make money. If that helps them make money and keep the sport sustainable, they've got to do it. Would that happen with the Euros? No, it wouldn't. But it is what it is. Barcelona, their leadership core is all over the age of 30. Their spine of their team is aging. So that's something they've got to address in the next couple of years. Suarez, Messi, Rakitic, they're all over the age of 30. Fan base, I couldn't give a toss really about their fan base, but I think, Barcelona, the core of their team, same with Real Madrid, is getting older, and there needs to be some areas addressed there. I think the 3 big teams at the top of Spanish football, their spine of their teams are all aging. They're the oldest teams in the league with average squad age, and there's going to become a point where they're going to have to rebuild. Now, will their rival teams in the rest of the league want to sell their best players? Probably not. They want to win. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, who they bring in, the youth systems they have. It's going to be interesting, but I can see some of the players nearing the end of their time in La Liga, they might end up in the MLS. They might end up in the Chinese system, but we'll see. I would say the European football is a higher quality than South America at the moment, but it wasn't always the case. The South American leagues back in the 60s and 70s had world-class players in them, because the various governments in South America didn't want to have their best players go overseas to Europe, because there was a whole lot of negative press about the governments of the day in South America, in Europe, and they wanted to control that. And there were rules about leaving Brazil and Argentina and Chile and Uruguay to play in Europe. They didn't want it to happen because they felt that it would undermine the value of the league. And look what's happened. Their best players are going over to Europe, and the leagues aren't as competitive. It's a win. It's a no-brainer there. But the Copa America is still fun to watch. Absolutely, it's still fun to watch, and the domestic leagues in South America are fun watch as well when the fans aren't busy rioting and killing each other. They are real fun to watch. The skill set that some of these players have. There's a reason why the best players end up in Europe out of South America. The skill set they have and the way they play the game is completely different. Defending isn't really a thing in South American football. Goalkeeping, hazardous at best. I think some of the goalkeepers have read the Rene Higuita goalkeeping handbook because there are some really interesting howlers in there and there's some really interesting defending in South American football. But it is the atmosphere of their league games is something to behold. The way they play the game, the style of play they have, completely different to the more pragmatic, organised, structured style that is European football. And I find it a joy to watch. But that's my personal opinion. Other people might find it different. My predictions on the Premier League and Champions League. I think it's going to be between Liverpool and Man City again this coming season. If Tottenham are to lose the nickname Chokespur, they have to invest in that squad. The Champions League, I think, is very open this coming season. I think it's very, very open. Same with the Europa League. I think both the European Cups are very, very open this coming year. My predictions are I'm terrible at predicting things. I've managed to predict the St. Louis Blues winning the Stanley Cup. I managed to predict the World Cup semi-finalists would all be European last year. It'd be a European winner. Didn't name a nation. But generally speaking, there was I think one weekend of Premier League fixtures where I tried to predict the scores and I got 1 out of 10 fixtures right. So I have a 10% strike rate with predictions. My predictions are terrible. If you followed my NRL coverage that I've done this year, I haven't done every round, which is my fault. But yeah, when I say I think it's going to be a win for this club, they generally go on and lose the next game. So I try and avoid predicting because I'm not very good at it. But I think it's going to come down to Liverpool, Man City again. I think Chelsea, who's going to be their manager? Is Sarri definitely going to Juventus? Is Lampard going to be the candidate? Because I think it's too soon in Lampard's managerial career for him to take that step. Tottenham, they have to invest in the squad. Arsenal, I'm not so sure about Arsenal and their chances. I think teams below them like Wolves and Bournemouth could leapfrog them. Man United, they're in a rebuild phase. It's I think there's a shift. There's been a shift in the Premier League, and I think some clubs that are outside the big six or the big four or whatever you want to call it. I think there's going to be a shift in where teams finish. I think it's going to become more competitive in the next couple of years. Is Ovechkin the best hockey player as of now? As a pure goal scorer, yes. As an out-and-out goal scorer, absolutely. As a leader, yeah. But you look at the playoffs this year, the Stanley Cup, and the failure of the Capitals to progress and do what they did last year. You look at the Russian national side in the World Championships failing to get a medal. I'm going to have to put it out there. I think his best days are now behind him, but he's still the best out-and-out goal scorer in the world. How long can he keep that up? I would say another couple of seasons. If he gets an injury in there, I think that could change the projection of how long he can play at the top level. But I still think he's going to be effective for at least 2 to 3 more seasons before we see a real drop-off in his production. I honestly believe that. How long is he going to remain a Capitals player? Will he go to the KHL at some point? That's up for debate. At the moment, from what I'm seeing and what it's going to be interesting. I think that's the Raptors. That's kind of they bought into a winning side. The Maple Leafs failed in the first round. It's going to be interesting to see how many people watch the Raptors next season coming up. I honestly do think the proof will be in the pudding if the Maple Leafs struggle again in the playoffs, or if they don't get to the playoffs this coming season. and the Raptors are successful, people are going to watch because Toronto is just a sports mad city. There's a reason why every major league in North America, apart from the NFL, have teams in Toronto. There is an absolute reason why it's got almost every team you can think of. You've got the Maple Leafs in the NHL, plus you've got the Marlies in the AHL. So they've got two Major League Ice Hockey teams there. You've got the Toronto Arrows in Major League Rugby, which is a smaller league, yes, but it's growing. You've got the Toronto FC in the Major League Soccer. You've got the Blue Jays in the Major League Baseball, and you've got the Raptors in the NBA. I think they've also got I forget, is it the Argonauts in Canadian Football League? Toronto have pretty much every major sport in North America apart from the NFL covered. It's the biggest sports market in Canada. It's, I think, one of the biggest sports markets in North America outside of New York, LA, and Chicago. It is what it is. It's the fourth biggest sports market in North America. It's huge. It's a huge metropolitan area, and it's the wealthiest area in Canada. It's where all the money is. So yeah, no, it's completely self-explanatory why they're already supporting the Raptors. I think it's more of a Canadian-wide thing with the Raptors because it's the only NBA team. We've discussed what the NBA could do in Canada and why they haven't decided to, go back to Vancouver with a team or look at another Canadian market. And there's a variety of issues, including size of market, Canadian dollar, tax rate, the weather. Because, weather is a big issue for getting free agents. I wouldn't say necessarily that New York is the best sports city in the world. It does have a lot of teams. It has, I think, two teams in every sport. I think you got two teams in baseball, two teams in the NFL, two teams in the NHL, two teams in the Major League Soccer. Two teams in the NBA. New York is the biggest city in the US. It's the biggest city in North America. It's the biggest metropolitan area. They can support that extra level of top flight professional team. They've got a team in Major League Rugby. They've got that population base to have the market area on that part of the East Coast. But yeah, football in London. Yeah, there's a lot of teams in London. It's the population base. It's the biggest city in the country. It's one of the biggest cities in Western Europe. It's one of the biggest cities it's in the top 30 cities in the world for size as well. I mean, these are big urban areas with a lot of disposable income, and you know, it is what it is. I think, yeah, if I mean, LA is a massive sports market. Chicago is a big sports market, and Toronto is similar. That's why you got all the teams there. It is a sports city. There's a lot going on with questions here. So Parramatta, we've got a Parramatta fan. I think the Eels have been very, very inconsistent this season. They can either score at will, or they concede at will. They're so inconsistent. Florida, the Nottingham Panthers. I've got to look at so many things here. I've got to look at the Panthers and because a lot of signings have been made in the Elite League and National League. A lot of players are getting signed. Is women's football the human embodiment of the Antichrist? No. I think the human embodiment of the Antichrist is Donald Trump. Maybe Boris Johnson. Nigel Farage, Antichrist. I think women's football, when men are trying to compare women's football to the men's game, it's a different game. If you don't like it, don't watch it. I've actually been quite entertained by the Women's World Cup. I think I've been entertained because it's been entertaining, and England are doing quite well. So when your national side is doing quite well, it makes it more fun to watch. I understand why Scotland are frustrated, but I've been quite entertained by the Women's World Cup. The quality level is improving. It's never going to be the same level as the men's game. But what I like about the women's game is there's not much diving. When they take a big tackle, they get up. They throw themselves into tackles that the men's game hasn't seen for 20 years. And it's a different style of football. It is a different style of football. The people who slag it off, don't have to watch it. but they want to slag it off. Yeah, they really people who there was one comment on my latest Women's Football World Cup game, which is the most vile. The guy says, "I love women; they can do whatever sport they want, but I'm gonna basically, um, become a homophobic, sexist, misogynist sod for 8 paragraphs." I'm so tempted to put that on Facebook and go, "Look at this tool." That's my personal opinion on that guy. I wouldn't say it's the embodiment of the Antichrist. It's just the Antichrist to those middle-aged men who still think, we're the world's best nation at football when we're not. Who used to fight on the terraces. That's that's my personal opinion on that one. With the Parramatta Eels, their inconsistency in the NRL, I've got to do a video on the Parramatta Eels and their history. Actually, I've got to get back in my NRL history videos because there's some really interesting things I can look at there. Would I rather go swimming with Michael Barrymore or Jaws? Ooh, I'd rather go swimming with Jaws, to be honest, because at least I know I'm with nature, I suppose. I have to admit that is a funny question. That's probably the question of the day, Mr. Chris Scott. I will get back, obviously, talk about the Newcastle takeover, which we've heard nothing from for a couple of weeks now. So I'm assuming that one's collapsed as per usual. Seems to happen a lot with Mike Ashley. The women's celebrations were disrespectful against Thailand. It's been the only major blowout game in the World Cup where it literally is so one-sided. Italy, Jamaica ended up as a 5-0, but it wasn't an embarrassing defeat by Jamaica. You could just see that the Italians wanted it more. The USA women's celebrations, well, it's the Americans, so whatever the Americans do, they're not very popular. But yeah, no, I do felt it got to the point where, like, okay, it's 10-0 now, it's 11-0 now. Just stop, just smile. You got your goal of the tournament. You got your eye in. It's big debate there, big debate. But if it was England, Germany in the final and we win 1-0 and we were to celebrate like that, for example, would that be disrespectful? I think at the end of the day, I think it got to the point where it was only 3-0 at half time. So it wasn't a blowout game at that point. It was that beginning of the second half where they got like 4 goals in like 6 minutes. And the second half was a bit of they just fell apart, and that happens when you have an unbalanced. I mean, it wouldn't happen in the men's game at the World Cup. Let's just say that. But it's the USA, and the USA are not a very popular nation around the world when it comes to how they celebrate their sporting accomplishments. I'm going to go yes. It's hard to explain why, but yeah, I would say yeah, they went very OTT after about the 5th goal. They knew they were going to win the game at half time. It was a question of how much. But the way the coach was encouraging it as well, oh dear. When the Americans, come up against, let's say, I think it's Sweden or Chile. Chile, they're going to beat Chile. We know that because the gap in class. But when they come up against Sweden and it's a tough game and it's a 2-1 or a 0-0 or something like that, and they celebrate like that, I don't know. Who will win the cricket? I think the weather has affected the group stages badly. Most games cancelled. It could definitely affect how the tournament progresses. But the weather is going to improve next week. Obviously, we've got India, Pakistan tomorrow. That's the big game that everyone's looking forward to. England have a very, very good chance, but they've got to pull their finger out, and they've got injuries. Everyone's talking up England for this World Cup. I'm not so sure. I think the players we've got now, a lot of them are overrated. Australia, I don't want the Aussies to win because Warner and Smith are back in the side, especially David Warner. He's a grotty individual. And if he was to win, that would really piss me off. I think India, for me, are the favourites because they just dominate this format of the game. The West Indies, okay, they've had a defeat to England. But for me, I think it would be the Indians, personally. But anything can happen. It's a World Cup, and it brings the best out of players. I mean, 4 years ago, England lost to Bangladesh, and Bangladesh got through to the quarterfinals, and England were out. So it is one of them. But it's the TV rights that's the problem. That's why the question: do anyone watch cricket? Well, I used to, and then Sky and Rupert Murdoch and the ECB decided to fuck over every single cricket fan in the country. royally, and have been doing so for 14 years. And that's why the sport has issues. It's not that the sport is not fun to watch or participate or play. I mean, I love playing it. I love watching it. It's they've made it so it's so unaccessible for the average fan, and the image of cricket is it's a rich man's game. I live right next to my local cricket club. I have 3 cricket clubs within a 5-minute walking distance of my house. I've trained with one of them, and a few of my mates play for the other one. So I could watch club level cricket for not a lot of money right now. I could walk down local cricket pitch and I could watch a game. Um, it, it is quite literally, um, accessible for me in that sense at the amateur level. But as you go up, I've been to Lords. I've watched Test matches, but it's expensive to get into London to the Oval and Lords. It's expensive to travel, ticket, food and drink. You work out all that together, and it actually works out at nearly 200-300 quid for the day, and that's just not sustainable. That is not sustainable in the slightest to do that just for a day. It's just not, and that's to do with the TV rights. But that's my personal view on it. A Cricket World Cup in Australia would be awesome. There have been some good tournaments down under before. We were debating World Cups and why Australia hasn't tried to get a football World Cup. They've had rugby union, they've had the rugby league, they've had the cricket, they've got the infrastructure there. They could do a joint bid with New Zealand, for example. But it's a different. I mean, the cricket arenas. You've had I think the Wagga. You've got the WACA in Perth is gone, but they've rebuilt that. You've got the Sydney Cricket Ground. You've got the Gabba. They have some big cricketing arenas in Australia. Big. The SCG, the MCG, the old WACA in Perth. The Gabba in Brisbane. The Gabba in Brisbane is just intimidating. You have to watch, footage of the crowd at the Gabba. They get vicious. Everyone thinks cricket's a gentleman's game. You haven't seen Australian fans. They can be a toxic bunch when it comes to cricket, and they really give it to the players of their own team, let alone the opposition. They really, give the opposition both barrels and their own side both barrels. They've been known to throw missiles at their players if the players are not playing well. The new Adelaide Oval. I've watched a bit of AFL. It's definitely a nice looking arena. It's a modern arena. But, I would love to go to Australia and go to places like the Gabba and go to places like the new WACA in Perth and the new Adelaide Oval and the MCG and the SCG. I would love to do all that, but it costs a lot of money from here in the UK to firstly get to Australia and then be able to partake in, watching sport. I mean, it's not cheap. It's not a cheap exercise for me to travel halfway across the world and then go watch a cricket match or an Aussie rules game or an NRL game. It's not a cheap experience. It is pretty expensive, but obviously on the bucket list. If the channel becomes self-sufficient, I would definitely 100% love to definitely love to go. The Pounds decided to go down the toilet because middle-aged and elderly people decided to vote for Brexit. So the pound has gone down the shitter, and therefore it's now better to go to Australia if you want to change your Aussie dollars into pounds. Not for me to visit Australia. For you guys to visit us, it's great. For me to go visit you, I lose money. So thank you, Conservative Party. Thank you very much, David Cameron. Oh, I hate our politicians. I hate the middle classes. I think, I love Australian sport. I love the NRL. I mean, I'm a Raiders fan, and they've won 3 in a row, and we got through our wobbly bit. Don't ruin the score for me because I've got to watch the game yet. Okay, I've got a website where I watch the games later on, so don't tell me the score. Broncos, Dave. I've got to look at the Broncos. I did a video on the Penrith Panthers and the Brisbane Broncos during their losing streaks. As soon as soon as I did those videos, but yeah, no, it's what it is. Okay, we're gonna get rid of him. I'll do that. Bye bye. Oh god, I just hate trolls. I really just hate trolls. Right. But I did a video on the Broncos and I did a video on the Penrith Panthers. As soon as I did those videos, they went on winning streaks. So I must be a good omen for teams that are having a shit season. I must do a video on every team that's struggling. I could do the Gold Coast Titans next because they're really crap. I think the Broncos, though, with Anthony Seibold, it's not been a good transition. Jimmy the Jet has obviously gone back to Sydney. There's a lack of experience in the spine of the side. There's issues with the age of the side as well. It's a very youngish team. It's an interesting one because I think the Broncos they've been the most consistent side for 30 years, but it's when you know the losing happens, it normally happens after a lengthy spell of being on the top, and they've been the best consistent side in the NRL era and pre-NRL era for 30 years. They've only missed finals football twice in their entire 31-year existence. There had to come a point where the wheels came off, and they had to fix things. They are still an outside bet for the finals. North Queensland Cowboys, they're having a poor season as well, for what's expected of them. Although they have climbed the table in recent weeks. It is what it is. How do I keep tabs on all these sports? I don't know. Is the answer. I mean, I'm working again now, but I had a lot of time in between my last job and my current job, and yeah, I was able to watch a lot of sport. I'm a big sports fan. And I do this channel, so I have to, I suppose. I make time to follow things. I mean, this channel started off as a hobby and as a personal vlog, and it's become this. So, it is what it is. I like my rugby league. I like my rugby union. I like my ice hockey. If I could cover them, I've never listened to music. I think music has got to the point where it's so commercialized crap now. It's dull. Am I watching Le Mans today? No, I'm not, because to be honest, I'll probably catch little bits of it tomorrow morning because there is some free-to-air coverage of Le Mans on ITV4, so I might catch a little bit in the morning like I did last year. But it's 24 hours. I mean, I'm not going to stay awake for a whole 24 hours. I would drop dead, but I'll catch what I can if I can. But Le Mans is one of them. It's like the Isle of Man TT. It is, I think you just have to fill up for watching it. I think the Isle of Man TT, they are nutters, and Le Mans. I mean, what annoys me about GT racing is you've got all the classes. You've got like 4 or 5 different classes of car racing against each other in these endurance races, and that's a bit annoying trying to keep up with the race when you've got like about 8 different classes of car going against each other. I've watched the Bathurst 12-hour. I've watched the Bathurst 6-hour in full, and it really annoys the hell out of me when you got like 3 to I think last year at the Bathurst it was like 8 different classes of car racing against each other. Yeah, that was a bit confusing as to who was where. It was just bananas. Because you're racing against your class, you're not racing against the guys on you on the track, because the pit stops and changeovers and engine type and class type, and it's not what it should be. That's my personal opinion on that one. But I occasionally watch it, but it's just so long. It's the ultimate event of driver endurance, though. I will say that. But as a viewing sport, it's not always the easiest to keep up the tabs who's where. Nah, I've gone off F1. I used to like it, but I've gone off it. The regulations at the moment are not conducive to the sport. They're not the best. I mean, I was watching NASCAR religiously for like the last 3-4 years, and I've tuned out a little bit with that as well with some of the regs they brought in. I think F1 has I think got the regulations wrong, got the rules wrong in places. I think Vettel, was that a penalty? Well, Ferrari aren't appealing it, but Ferrari have been a shambles this season and last season. So, what do I know? I went off F1, I would say, back in 2010, 2011. I started to get a bit bored. NASCAR is more fun because anyone can win a race. It's more wheel to wheel. Just because F1 looks more stylish, well, it is. There's more money in it, but it's less entertaining. But I think they've got the regulations all wrong. The TV deal they've signed is all wrong. One free-to-air race this year. Come on. It's not good. That's not a good look when the majority of the teams are based in this country. They've chased the money. It's far too corporate now. Far too corporate now. And the regulations, not great. Not great for wheel-to-wheel racing. Circuit. I mean, there's a whole host of issues that I have with F1. A whole host. And because I'm not a Hamilton fan, apparently I'm a racist according to some people, which is just mind-boggling annoying. He's a middle-class bloke from Hemel Hempstead who's trying to play this ghetto attitude, which he never lived in. So it's dull. I'm not a big F1 fan. I prefer the touring cars and I prefer the NASCAR because anyone can beat anyone and it's wheel to wheel and there's always some kind of action there. I'm single seat car racing. I've never really enjoyed, to be 100% honest. Don't get me wrong. When I was a kid growing up, F1 was fun to watch because every race was live on the telly. But it's alive and free on the telly, being a big hint there. But no, not all NASCAR. They have some road courses in NASCAR. They have Watkins Glen and Sonoma, and Watkins Glen can have some big pile-ups. But people think it's boring, but actually, if you look at the driver skill necessary to go at 200 plus miles an hour, about 2 inches away from the guy next to you without crashing into him and just getting it wrong, that NASCAR is more interesting than people realise. I actually find it quite interesting. Plus, it's more open as a motor racing sport because you just pay a couple of dollars and you can go down the pit lane and meet all the drivers. You don't have to pay like hundreds of thousands of dollars. You just pay a small fee and you get to meet all the drivers. It's expensive to get into motor racing. It is very, very expensive, and it is a rich man's game. Let's not kid ourselves. It's one of them. It's unless you got some friends who got a bit of money to sponsor you. You got to start young. And it's a rich man's game for the most part. Which is a shame, but it's expensive sport to get involved in. It really is expensive to be involved in motorsport. It is what it is, though. It's one of those sports where you've got to have money to get a foothold in there, really. And it's a shame because there are a couple of drivers who've done it the hard way, where they've been fans and they've got a racing license, which you can do. You can pay to get a racing license. You can go and get a racing license, and then you've got to find a drive, and then you've got to find a team to give you a seat, and it is hard to get into it, and it is hard to make a living out of it at the bottom end. It really is. But it's definitely fun to watch. It's definitely fun to be a part of. I've got friends who work in motorsport. I've got friends who do the British Motocross Championship. I've got friends who mechanics, engineers. I've got friends who work in the design side of things. So I know a lot of people who are involved actively in the day-to-day running of motorsport. Yeah. The mechanics aren't paid as much as you think for a year's work for a racing team. They get paid more than your average car mechanic, but they're not paid as much as you think. But no, it is apparently really good fun and a good laugh and a good and there's a sort of a team unity around it. The unsung heroes are the mechanics and the engineers that put the bikes and the cars on the grid. But it is what it is, and uh, the motorsport will always be expensive. It always will be. It always has been and always will be. It's always been a very difficult sport to get into. Motorcycle racing is less expensive to get into, but again, there's still a lot of sacrifices that you have to make to get to the top. A lot of sacrifices, hell of a lot of sacrifices. It is what it is. Do I enjoy watching? I mean, I enjoy watching the superbikes. I enjoy watching motocross. I enjoy watching touring cars, and I enjoy watching NASCAR because there's always something happening. And two-wheel racing's fun because they are generally not. They're not up here. They are gone. They are out there. But I mean, the fact that MotoGP is no longer on free-to-air TV, superbikes is highlights only on free-to-air TV. That's where the issue's gone with motorsport. Is that it's gone too much chasing the money and it's putting off a lot of people. Yeah, the last Super Bowl did really suck. If you watch Canadian football, the CFL, it's a better style of game. It's quicker. There's less time delays, but it's it's more niche because there's only 7 professional teams. The Champions League, the Europa League, the first 20 minutes sent me to sleep. The Champions League sent me to sleep. The Super Bowl sent me to sleep. I watched a combined total of 35 minutes of all 3 finals combined because they were that dreary. But this is what happens occasionally. You just have that one final, that one game that isn't as good as expectations. I'm not a massive NFL fan, but yeah, that was. I mean, I've watched every Super Bowl for. I've watched every Super Bowl for 14 years. That was the one I've watched the least of. I watched 3 minutes of it, and I watched a set of plays, and I was like, "This is crap." There is no attempt at any kind of exciting play. This is just dull. But look, it is what it is. Like, it's done now. We move on, and there's next season. And it's like the last year's FA Cup final was absolutely terrible. Worse than the Champions League final. That FA Cup final last year, I watched all of that FA Cup final last year between Man United and Chelsea. That was a shocking FA Cup final. And I managed to sit through the whole bloody thing. And I don't know how. The Europa League final, I wouldn't say it was terrible, but 20 minutes of watching it and I was asleep, which is a shame because I missed like 5 goals and Eden Hazard's best ever game. The choice of venue was wrong. The criticism that UEFA has received is justified. And the fact that they reduced the capacity to hide the empty seats, yet there were still empty seats all over the place. At the end of the day, the UEFA has to take the criticism and learn from it, and I don't think they will because they chase the money. But no, they shouldn't have never have put that final in Azerbaijan, not even in the slightest. That was a poor decision for a final, and the fans rightly stayed away. The Champions League this year, I mean, look, some of the scorelines, yeah, but the fact it's all on BT Sport, I don't understand that. It's wrong. I miss the days when the Champions League in this country was on ITV and Sky because it was balanced between subscription and free to air, and that I think, it's lost something a little bit from with football. It's gone. They've chased too much money. They've chased too much money in football, and it's starting to backfire because fans are starting to turn against it. Greece, they've played some finals in Greece. They've played some finals in Turkey. And they haven't been bad finals in Athens and Turkey. They've been some pretty decent finals over the years. The final in Moscow in 2008 wasn't a bad final. It wasn't the best final. It wasn't a bad final. I just think that the fans were not considered really when they chose the location for the Europa League final. They knew. You just the fans were an afterthought. Really, personally. Oh yeah, the Champions League on free to air TV was brilliant because there used to be 2 games a week, then it went to 1. So it used to be the Tuesday and the Wednesday, and then it was just the 1 day a week, be it the Wednesday or the Tuesday. And yeah, you could, and Europa League as well on the Thursday, and then they took it away, and it's because football has got greedy, and the clubs that make the European spaces have got greedy. And now various leagues have had a UEFA meeting at the end of the season, and they're saying, look, the TV rights is not right. It's not balanced, and the future of the game in various countries is in serious crisis. And yeah, the match fixing allegations against so many leagues have gone through the roof in the last 20 years. And it's because the amount of money in the game. The amount of money in the game is killing it. And I think, yeah, they've. Oh yeah, God, look. I mean, I look on social media on Twitter. Twitter is a good barometer of how people feel. And yeah, people aren't happy. They are not happy. I think the TV companies are realizing because there's been a bit more European club rugby on Channel 4, Channel 5, domestic and club rugby for the European competitions on Channel 4 and Channel 5 the last year or so. The Women's Super League, I know it's women's football and people are kicking off about it, but it is on easily free to accessible network, BBC. People are having enough. And the Elite League is on Free Sports. So if you can get Free Sports tuned in on a Freeview box, which I should be able to do this evening, yeah, you get the Portuguese League, you get the Copa America, you get ice hockey, you can get, I think NASCAR's on there, V8 Supercars. You can get a fair bit on Free Sports. And yeah, BT are shocking. I'm a BT. Look, my family are BT customers for the internet, and the internet is absolutely diabolical. And when I move out in a few months, I'm not going to be a BT customer. I've told BT that. I said no, fuck off, because they try to sell me through my EE contract. I said no. They literally in store said, you know, you're eligible for BT Sport and all that. I went, you can jog on. I actually said I'm not paying to prop up a failing TV company that no one wants to watch and was meant to be free to air. I've actually said to an EE customer service advisor in a shop saying, why should I prop up a failing TV company that was meant to be free to air and accessible for all, which is failing miserably? They had no answer. Women's World Cup, I mean, I've covered almost every game. I've watched bits of every game for the most part. There's 2 games today. And I've had some pretty crappy comments from a couple of viewers, and one of them is the most vile rant I've ever heard. It's not the same as the men's game, so stop comparing it. This is what I don't get with people. They're spending all this time complaining about the women's game, but they don't want to watch it. Well, then you don't have to. They say it's been forced down their throats. No, it's not. No, it's not. You could quite happily watch the cricket on Sky if you really want to pay the money for it. Or go outside, go to the pub. There's things to do. You don't have to watch women's sport. It just shows the mindsets on these people. I think it's been better than people expected. I think apart from the USA Thailand game, it's been fun. That game has created a lot of debate about the celebrations of all the goals. And of course, you would not see that in a men's World Cup. A 6-0 was considered a thumping, but, you know, women's game, the US, it's a record for a World Cup in either women's or men's football. It's a record that someone's got 5 goals in a game, 10 goals after half time. They've broken every record that's been in place for 12 years since Argentina lost 11-0 to Germany. But apart from that, it's been a good tournament. The big talking point is VAR, and I'm bringing this back to the men's game because the rule changes they have brought in for this season, are going to affect the men's game in the Champions League, the Euros, the Europa League, and domestic cup competitions going forward. But people want to slag off the women. They're still better than any of these people slagging them off are ever going to be. Ever. I'm just putting it out there. These women are still better than the men slagging them off. And the one guy put the shitty comment up last night, and you can find it on my latest Women's World Cup video. He says, I'm off to play FIFA on my Xbox now. And I went, well, that sums you up, doesn't it? You've spent longer writing out 8 paragraphs of homophobic, sexist, misogynist shit, and you're going to go play FIFA. Oh, bless. Oh, God, that's the closest you're ever going to get to professional football. Yeah, it is stupid to compare men and women's sports, even if it's the same sport they're playing. I've enjoyed it. I think there's a lot to learn from it with the rule changes, with handball, VAR, and for that reason, that's really important for the men's game. There's no diving. I've seen a couple of dives. I've seen a player get booked for diving. I've seen 3 players dive in this tournament so far. 3. In the men's game, it'll be every other minute. I think the energy levels they're showing and the commitment is there. I do disagree with them asking for equal pay. I do. I think that's where, they've got it wrong, because they're not generating the revenues. There's only been 3 sold-out games so far. England and Argentina last night was nearly a sellout in Le Havre, and the 2 French games. They're the ones that have actually had the biggest crowds. So they could have done a better job at marketing and ticket pricing. That's on FIFA. That's on the organisers. But overall, the pitches have held up well, even when they've had biblical rain. They've only had 1 rain delay for a thunderstorm that was actually worse than the weather we've had here, and they had to for safety reasons. It only lasted 45 minutes. The pitches have held up better than they did in the Euros 3 years ago. The stadiums look amazing. The infrastructure is there. It's been a very, very good tournament, and people are still slagging it off. They can go away. They can just sod off, because 6.1 million people watched England and Scotland. So it does say that all the people who are not interested in women's football, there's a market there, and people are buying in. Partly because the men's teams are so shit, but that's another thing. Yeah, Scotland have been hard done by. I think the penalty against England is, by definition of the rules, and I'm going back to this unnatural arm position. Just say ball hits hand, is penalty or free kick. Let's just get rid of this ambiguity. Is it a natural, unnatural position? Is it deliberate or accidental? Bull crap. Let's just go ball hits hand or arm, it's handball. End of. I think that's what the wording needs to be. I think the FIFA have brought this ambiguity into the rulings, which is creating confusion and more debate than it needs to. That was a penalty if you're going by the new letter of the law. In the game against Japan, maybe a couple of decisions. But the reason why Scotland lost those games is not because of VAR. They've lost those games because in the first half they allowed themselves to concede 2 goals. Regardless if that second Japan goal was actually a penalty or not, is irregardless. They did not play well enough for the first half of both games. The last 20 minutes against Japan, and I think the whole second half against England, they were the better side. But if you put the 2 games together, all 180 minutes of football, they've been second best in both games. And they've been 2-0 down in both games and then chasing the game. They played better 2-0 down than when it was 0-0. They did deserve to lose both games if you look at it on possession, shots, passing accuracy, the whole thing. Yeah, the VAR hasn't been favourable to them, but they haven't helped themselves by being 1 or 2-0 down before they start playing. So I have to go with what they've been playing like, and they haven't been playing good enough compared to the opposition. I'm sorry, it's fact. The Japanese in the first game were terrible against Argentina. Scotland had a great opportunity to catch them on the counter-attack because they were very slow in possession and are open to being caught on the counter-attack because there's pace in that Scotland side, and they didn't take advantage of a Japanese side that's in transition. End of. Simple. Megan Rapinoe, that celebration against Thailand is the one that's really pissed off a lot of people. She is for the women's game, a great player. She's a very, very good player. Technically, very, very good. Great vision for, great communication with her teammates, great combinations. The real test for the US is when they play Sweden. I think that's where they could get unstuck. I think Sweden, not labouring, but grinding out a win against Chile has served them in better stead because they didn't play when they won, rather than a training ground exercise. I honestly think Sweden would have learnt more from beating Chile 2-0 than the USA would have learnt from beating Thailand 13-0. So we'll see how good the USA really are when it comes to a proper test against equal opposition. That's where you get the knowledge there. The Swedes are a good side as well, and the Swedes have really, the Scandinavian countries have been really supportive of women's football for 20, 30 years longer than England have, or France or Germany to a point. The Scandinavian countries really have had good support for the women's game for longer than I've been alive. So that's the answer to that one. FIFA clamping down on diving. We've got this retrospective rule that's barely used over here in the Premier League and the Football League. Look, you could book Neymar 9 times a game. The referees just don't have the courage to do it. The referees do not have the courage to go, you are an arse. Personally, I think it is embarrassing in the men's game, the amount of diving. But there is a rule there. You get booked for diving. And not enough referees have the courage to go, that is so painful to watch you throw yourself, I'm going to book you. Because if there is any contact made, it's not classed as a dive. I think the game's got to that point now where it's part of the game. Until a coach comes in and changes a team's culture, or a league really instructs referees to go, tell him to get up, don't give a free kick. The way the players are petulant, the way the players react, the cynicism, Neymar doesn't help. Players like Neymar are embarrassing. He should have been booked every time he fell over in the World Cup. He fell over. If you're getting kicked in the knee, don't hold your face. If you're getting elbowed in the back of the head, don't hold your leg. It's kind of obvious. If you're going to simulate, at least try and make it look like you're injured. I mean, it was embarrassing watching Neymar last summer. Absolutely cringe. And yeah, 4 years previously, he did have his back broken by a Colombian player. I get that. But every other time, he's cynical. He's petulant. His histrionics are embarrassing. He's paid how much a year? What is it, 39 million a year, 40 million a year to do that? That is embarrassing. And this is why the game struggles to grow in North America and in Australia, because they're used to brutal contact sports like rugby league and ice hockey and NFL. This is why they struggle to grow the market in these countries, is because of the embarrassment that is players like Neymar and who was the Leeds player who went down like a sack of shit? Oh, the players in the 80s would have broken his leg. They would have literally just snapped his leg off and told him to fuck off. He wouldn't have survived in the 80s. He has the skill. He has the ability. But on the same side, his cynical, histrionic play, a centre-back or a solid wing-back would have snapped, or a defensive midfielder would have literally just gone up and snapped his leg. 2-footed, knee height, career done. His career would have been ended after about a few days. He wouldn't have survived the 80s or the early 90s. He would have been hacked out of the game completely. And rightly so, because he actually brings the game into disrepute. I shouldn't say that, but he brings so much disrepute to the game, he would be kicked out of the game completely. Absolutely, completely. But but now there's allegations about Neymar's private life that are pretty disgusting as well. He's not the right image for football. He shouldn't be the poster boy for football. He really shouldn't. But that's my personal opinion, and we move on. The favourites to win the Women's World Cup, the USA are up there, but that's one game. England and Italy have looked really good. Italy have been a surprise package. They're already through to the second round. They've booked their place to the next phase by winning their first 2 games. That's I think the USA are favourites because they are the world's number 1, but world rankings are deceptive, and world rankings are deceptive in any sport, absolutely any sport. And look at that French team that won last year in the men's game. Really, not a great side. Apart from a couple of games, they weren't a great side, and defensively they were a shambles. Both against Argentina, where they could have won easily and they let in 3 goals, and against the Croatians in the final. Terrible defensively, not as good as people make them out to be as the French. I think they're going to get hammered in the Euros. I really do. But that's my personal opinion. But Didier Deschamps, more like an accountant. He works the numbers out. He works the percentages out. people are going, why is Aymeric Laporte not in the side? Well, he chose to play for Spain as well if he wasn't selected by France, and neither side wants to select him now because of politics. So there's your answer to why Aymeric Laporte isn't in there. Yeah, Neymar is a technically gifted player, but at the same time, he's an absolute. He's not the poster boy football needs. He wouldn't get into the Brazil 1970 side, the greatest side of all time. He would not get into that team. Do you know why? They didn't dive. That was when men were men. Yeah, no, the Brazil side of the 1970 World Cup, greatest team of all time. The Dutch side of 74 and 78, he wouldn't even get. If you would say Neymar, let's say his nationality is irrelevant, he would not get into the Argentina 78 side. He wouldn't get into the Dutch sides of 74 and 78. He wouldn't get into the Brazil side of 1970. Weakest side to win the World Cup, probably France this last year. And guess what? They won the World Cup and Neymar didn't. So that tells you all you need to know about him, partly as a player, but his attitude. It's called karma. He can't win the Champions League with PSG, and his histrionics are embarrassing. And the allegations about what's happening in his private life of misconduct are starting to surface. I'm not surprised with the attitude and the contempt he has. I'm really not surprised. He's a vile individual. It's not just his attitude; it's him. He is a vile individual, and it's a shame because there's a lot of football players that are like this now, and a lot of it's to do with the money. A lot of it is to do with the money they are paid to do not a lot of stuff. Pretty much. While I'm a massive sports fan, this is one of the reasons why I'm turning off football is the amount of money they are paid per week a player used to earn in a year. And when players like Danny Rose goes, 50 grand a week is not enough for me, I need to have 100 grand a week. I look at myself and I go, well, the top wage in 1989, the year I was born, was £67,000 a year in English football. And he earns that in a week, pretty much. Just a shade under. That's wrong. I think he gets that in French football because the French hooligans are exceptionally racist. He's had it in Brazilian football where they shoot each other. I think Neymar wouldn't survive in the Premier League. Messi has never even dared go to the Premier League. That's why I can't call Messi the greatest of all time because he stayed in La Liga. He hasn't branched out and tried a league like the Bundesliga or Serie A where defenders will kick the crap out of you. They do. But football now is not, I would say football now is not the quality it was 20, 30 years ago. It really isn't. I actually feel when I was a kid growing up, the quality of professional football was higher when the wages were less. That's my personal opinion. I honestly believe the money has ruined the sport and players are in it for the cash now rather than the joy of the sport. There is a lot of players who are in it for a payday. They're decent technically, they're decent players, but they can get paid stupid amounts of money. Whereas a world-class player 20 years previously would get paid what they earn in a week, in a year. So that's my personal opinion on things. I think the money has distorted the direction that the game is taking. It has. Absolutely. Money has distorted the direction the game is taking. I think players are massively overpaid. And I think the quality of football is actually less now than what it was 20, 30 years ago because you've got Ronaldo and Messi sharing Ballon d'Ors every other year. But they're just out and out goal scorers with a bit of creativity. You look at over in the 80s and 90s, players like Figo, and then you had Veron for Argentina. You had players like David Beckham for England, who were good set piece specialists and good leaders. They weren't out and out goal scorers; they were just technically gifted. You don't have that midfielder winning the Ballon d'Or anymore, like you used to. It's all about who scores the most goals. Let's give it to this guy, and it's stupid. But that's my personal opinion. NFL, only the top end NFL players distort the average. You look at the average salary in the NFL, it's actually not as high as you think. It's not as high as you think for the NFL players getting paid as much as you think. Only the top end quarterbacks and wide receivers get paid the big money. The average salary is not as much as you think. It's actually a lot less. It honestly is. It's because the top players earn so much, it distorts the average. People ask me who's my favourite player, or greatest player, or favourite player of all time. I think the greatest player of all time is Pele, because you look at his goal scoring record, but you look at his creativity as well, and what he could bring to a game. And then you look at some of the unsung heroes of teams. And great players need a great backup band, a great backing band, and yeah, Messi doesn't have that outside of Barcelona. He doesn't have the backing band in Argentina. Partly because the coaches are useless, but there's all sorts. But you've got to remember those contracts are split over many, many years, so they work out at roughly equivalent to a Neymar salary over a period of time, because there's other add-ons in there. And in reality, what they actually take home after tax is a lot less than what the contract says. The Raptors winning the NBA. I've discussed it a few times on the stream today. I think the fans' response, a lot of them are Canadian sports fans that their NHL teams were at the playoffs, and they are bandwagoners. And come the regular season, the NHL will be the top ticket in town. A lot of people say, "Oh no, I'll watch the Raptors." They really won't. They will watch the Maple Leafs. For years, the Canadian media have slagged the Raptors off year after year after year. It's only the last 3 months that Tim and Sid, for example, actually give a stop. This Canadian media actually stopped slagging off the NBA and actually started like licking its bumhole. I think the NBA could grow in Canada if they do it right, and they have got it horribly wrong in the past so many times. There's a reason why the team in Vancouver is not in Vancouver anymore. Mismanagement, poor roster, free agency, a whole host of reasons. Most of it's economic reasons, because the Canadian dollar to the US dollar and taxes put free agents off signing. The NBA, they have the highest salaries on average across the board, but rosters are a lot smaller, so you can actually spend more on your players on the salary cap because there's less people in a team, in a squad, because the squads are so much smaller. It is what it is. An NHL squad is a lot bigger. The roster's bigger. NFL's huge. Baseball's huge. NBA, really small rosters, so they can pay all the players pretty high salaries. Plus, the NBA is the wealthiest sports league in the world. Wealthiest sports league in the world. The worst team is still worth $1 billion with all its assets. That's player salaries and assets. Even if after tax the profits are less, they're still worth money. It's how the NBA markets itself as well. It's well marketed in the US. Outside the US, it's getting better. It is getting better, but it's lagging behind other sports with overseas TV rights. The NFL and NHL actually get the overseas TV rights better. Major League Baseball is all over the place with its overseas rights, especially to the European market where a lot of money is. Major League Soccer, it's football, so it'll be picked up by whatever carrier's got the football highlights package for overseas football. And Major League Soccer in this country, you can watch on Free Sports, free to air, live. And I've watched a few games, and I've been, I've enjoyed it. But it depends on like what sports you want to watch and what leagues you want to watch. Really, at the end of the day, it depends what you, the end customer, the sports fan, what leagues you're interested in, what teams you follow, and what you as a sports fan want to consume at the end of the day. And if there's enough market there, that's why the NBA is on Sky. Sky Sports have worked out there's enough people, just enough people, to warrant having the TV rights because they can make money. BT Sport have worked out if we hold the Champions League hostage, people will want to watch it, but they are turning off. Which is what I noticed on the BT Sport live streams. They disabled the live stream comments because of the criticism they've had the last couple of years of just having the two finals on free streaming on YouTube, but the rest of the Champions League and Europa League behind a paywall. They have taken a beating of criticism, and they just don't want to. They tried to block out the criticism, and they've been taking a hammering in the criticism of their, why was the network originally meant to be free to air and now it's behind a paywall? BT Sport heavily criticised, heavily criticised. They're losing a lot of TV rights for a lot of leagues and a lot of sports. BT Sport is not in a good place, and it's being propped up by BT customers and EE customers for their mobile phones and internet. That's what's propping up BT Sport. Is the other businesses owned by EE and owned by the BT Group are propping up a failing TV channel, and I'm not sure how long BT Sport can survive. Honestly, I think it's in trouble. Oh yeah, no. Apparently, BT Sport they go, if we can't see the criticism, it doesn't exist. Then they obviously, their social media team hasn't really been paying attention to how much abuse they get for the poor coverage. The guy who actually came up with the idea for BT to have a sports channel has been fired. He was fired last year. He was told to go away. You've cost us a lot of money, and we are having to adjust our company business model to prop up this arm of the company, of the group. It's a mess. Sky is not in a good place either. Sky has just been bought by Comcast, so there will be, when the TV deal expires for the current sports packages in 2021, I believe, there's going to be a massive restructuring of Sky in 2 years' time. And I do hope there's more free-to-air coverage, because Sky's starting to lose money as well. They're still making a profit, but they're not as much as they were. The thing is, the sports package, BT Sport, initially was meant to be a free-to-air network to compete against Sky. It was meant to be on Freeview. We were meant to get it free-to-air, and within a few weeks, it was, no, we're putting it behind a paywall. I watched the opening Freeview. I watched the initial, first broadcast. It was shit. I watched it. I was like, the production values of this is poor. The hosts they've got to present, like Austin Healey, is not a good rugby union host. He's an annoying little man. Very few of their sports pundits are actually any good. They've had to nick them from other networks rather than developing their own. So Gary Lineker goes over, does the Champions League on BT, and then he hops back to BBC. Robbie Savage, working for both the BBC and BT Sport. It's not a good look when they haven't found independent journalists and other ex-players who want to get into the media. They've had to sort of borrow them from other channels, and then they give them back. It's terrible. It's terrible quality. I don't know why my mum's bit of the family persist in having all the sport. I really do not know why they persist with both BT and Sky Sports. I mean, I haven't been around my mum's house in a couple of years, and I've watched BT Sport, the rugby on there, and I've watched Sky Sports. And even though I'm not a fan of Sky, it's better quality. It is better quality. It's still shit, but it's better than real shit, which is BT. It's not worth the money that you spend on it. And if you are a BT customer, I do urge you to go find another supplier, because the more people who switch off BT and EE and go to other networks, it will hit them harder, because they cannot keep raising the prices on people's bills. They cannot. It's unjustifiable, and people are not willing to pay. They're going, nah, not willing to pay anymore. Go away. Do one. People are switching off, and they're saying, nah, enough's enough. We're not willing to pay for this anymore. And I think the regulator has to look at, the subscription sports as a thing and go, is this sustainable, and is it right? Because for too long, the consumer in this country has been ripped off, and sports fans have had enough. And there's a big debate about the TV licenses of the BBC and the over 75s, and the BBC losing coverage of the golf, for example, and F1 and MotoGP, and the fact that the BBC gives the operating licenses to channels and networks in this country is another debating point. But we could go to talk to death about TV rights and how good or bad a network is. Look what happened to Setanta. Look what happened to ITV Sport. People just did not want to have that secondary subscription TV supplier. They just did not want to have it. Eurosports lost viewers because it's gone behind a paywall. People just are not willing to pay anymore. But that's the end of it. That's the discussion there. Right. Anyway, I'm going to call that a day because it's 11:30 and I've been going for 3 hours, and I've got to get ready for a few other bits and pieces. Do some other things. And I will have, obviously, the match reviews for the 2 Women's World Cup games today. And I'll also be doing a few other vids on a few other bits and pieces like the NRL and NHL and NBA. So for now, thank you very much for watching. And I will see you all much later.